I never told my husband that my father was the chairman of a $1 billion corporation. Then he brought his mistress home and smirked. Her father owns the company that signs my biggest contracts, so do not make her angry. I did not say a single word. I just texted my father, SOS. 3 minutes later, their contract was gone. The heat from the oven washed over my face as I carefully pulled out the roasted chicken. The rich aroma of rosemary garlic and fresh lemon filled our spacious kitchen, masking the faint smell of the furniture polish I had used to scrub the hardwood floors that morning. It was Friday evening, exactly 6 years since Bradley and I stood before an altar in a small suburban church and promised to love each other for better or for worse in sickness and in health. I am Abigail, 34 years old. Once upon a time, I was a rising junior analyst in mergers and acquisitions at a top-tier financial firm in Manhattan. I was ambitious, relentlessly driven, and pulling in a salary that easily justified the 80-hour work weeks. But when Bradley decided to start his own commercial real estate firm, the long nights, endless networking, and constant stress began to take a severe physical toll on him. Out of pure love and devotion, I made a choice. I stepped back from my own promising career. I traded my tailored suits and corporate boardroom presentations for the quiet, invisible role of handling his back-office books from our guest room. I became the silent engine running his entire business. I managed the payroll, reconciled the complex ledgers, dealt with aggressive vendors, and kept the IRS completely off his back, all without taking a single dime in salary. I did it because I believed with all my heart that we were building an empire together. I wanted him to shine. I wanted him to be the charming face of success, while I fortified the foundation behind the scenes. I set the heavy roasting pan on the granite counter and wiped my hands on my apron. I had spent all afternoon meticulously preparing this anniversary meal. I had set the dining room table with our expensive wedding china, polished the silver until it gleamed and lit the tall taper candles he always loved. I heard the familiar heavy click of his key turning in the front door lock. A warm, loving smile spread across my face. I untied my apron, tossed it onto a kitchen stool, smoothed down the skirt of my simple navy blue dress, and walked toward the foyer to greet my husband. But the smile froze on my lips the moment he stepped inside. He was not alone. Before my brain could even fully process the scene unfolding in my own hallway, the overwhelming stench of cheap, cloying floral perfume hit my nostrils. It was heavy, sickeningly sweet, and completely out of place in the warm, cinnamon-scented air of our home. Then I saw her. Bradley strolled confidently into our entryway, his fingers laced tightly through the hand of a young, striking blonde woman. I recognized her face immediately from the company payroll directories I managed every week. It was Chloe. She was 26 years old and had been hired 6 months ago as Bradley's remote marketing consultant. Remote, he had always emphasized to me, claiming she lived entirely out of state and only handled our digital ad campaigns through email. Yet here she was standing in my foyer, wearing a skin-tight crimson dress that left absolutely nothing to the imagination, her designer heels sinking into my expensive Persian rug. My heart began to pound violently against my ribs, beating so fast I thought it might shatter my chest. A sickening cold knot tightened in the pit of my stomach. My breathing turned rapid and shallow. I looked at Bradley, my eyes pleading, waiting for an explanation, a terrible joke, anything to make this surreal nightmare stop. But his handsome, familiar face was perfectly calm. There was no guilt in his eyes, no shame, no remorse. There was only a chilling, calculated indifference. Chloe let go of his hand and sauntered past me into the kitchen, her high heels clicking loudly and aggressively against the hardwood floor. Without an ounce of hesitation or basic human decency, she dropped her heavy quilted Chanel handbag right onto the pristine marble island, knocking over a crystal salt shaker that shattered into a dozen pieces on the floor. She did not even flinch at the sound of the breaking glass. She simply turned around, crossed her arms under her chest, and looked me up and down with a gaze dripping with absolute unfiltered contempt. She took in my flour-dusted hands, my unstyled hair, my simple dress, and my bare face. Her lips curled into a vicious, mocking sneer. "So this is the boring housewife," she said, her voice high-pitched and incredibly grating. "Bradley told me you were plain, but wow, you seriously wear an apron. Is it the 1950s? You look exactly like the kind of woman who spends her whole day scrubbing floors and clipping coupons. No wonder he never wanted to bring you to the firm's holiday galas. You are completely embarrassing." I felt the blood drain rapidly from my face. My hands began to tremble so violently that I had to grip the back of a wooden dining chair just to keep my legs from giving out. Bradley, what is this? What is going on here? I managed to choke out my voice, breaking into a fragile whisper. Bradley walked slowly into the kitchen, stepping right over the broken crystal glass, completely ignoring my visible pain. He did not offer a single word of apology. He did not look away in shame. Instead, he reached into his sleek leather briefcase, pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope, and slid it across the kitchen island. It stopped right next to the beautiful anniversary dinner I had spent 5 agonizing hours cooking. Divorce papers, he said, his tone as casual and flat as if he were ordering a cup of black coffee. I stared at the brown envelope as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Divorce. I repeated, my brain entirely refusing to process the cruel words escaping his mouth. Today is our 6th anniversary, Bradley. We just talked about starting a family last week. We were going to look at baby cribs on Sunday. Bradley let out a short, cynical laugh that echoed coldly against the kitchen cabinets. Abigail, please stop being so dramatic. We have been drifting apart for years. You're perfectly content, staying at home, playing with spreadsheets, baking bread, and living a small, insignificant life. But I'm growing. My firm is expanding at a massive rate. I am a CEO now, a visionary. I need a partner who understands the high-stakes business world. I need someone who can stand beside me at elite galas and impress the right investors. I am upgrading my life. You are just a glorified calculator. Anyone can use accounting software, Abigail. You are entirely replaceable. He looked over at Chloe with a sickeningly sweet expression, completely validating her vile behavior before turning his cold, dead eyes back to me. And since we are being brutally honest today, he continued, casually adjusting the expensive platinum cufflinks I had bought him for his birthday, you have exactly 3 days to pack your things and vacate this house. The room started to spin violently. The walls felt like they were closing in on me. Vacate the house. I asked, my voice rising in sheer panic. We bought this house together. My savings paid for the entire down payment. I paid for the renovations. This is my home. Your savings are gone, Abigail, and legally, this house belongs entirely to me, Bradley stated, crossing his arms over his chest with a look of absolute triumph. Do you remember that post-nuptial agreement you signed 2 years ago? The one I asked you to sign when the business was struggling and we needed to shield our personal assets from corporate liability. My breath hitched sharply in my throat. The memory hit me like a physical blow. 2 years ago, Bradley had come home in tears late at night. He claimed a massive frivolous lawsuit was threatening to bankrupt the firm and destroy everything we had built. He cried, begging me to sign a legal document transferring all our marital assets, including the house and our joint investment accounts, solely into his name to protect them from aggressive creditors. He swore on his life that it was just a temporary legal shield, a technicality to keep us safe. Because I loved him, because I trusted him unconditionally as my husband and my partner, I signed the papers without a second thought. I signed away my legal rights to protect the man I loved. He smirked broadly, seeing the devastating realization hit my face. That document was ironclad, Abigail. You waived all rights to alimony, the business revenue, and this property. You gave it all to me legally and voluntarily. You have absolutely nothing. You are walking away with zero. I stood paralyzed, the heat from the oven still warming my back, while my entire reality shattered into a million jagged pieces on the floor. I had sacrificed my youth, my career, and my financial security to build a throne for a man who was now kicking me into the dirt to make room for his mistress. Before I could even formulate a rational response to this monstrous calculated betrayal, Bradley took a step closer to me. His voice dropped into a menacing, arrogant warning. He wrapped his arm tightly around Chloe's waist and pulled her flush against his side. And let me make one thing crystal clear to you right now, Abigail. I expect you to be perfectly polite and submissive to Chloe while you pack your bags. Do not cause a scene. Do not throw a tantrum. You see, Chloe is not just my beautiful future wife. Her father is Richard Sterling, the regional vice president of Vanguard Holdings. My eyes widened slightly. Vanguard Holdings was the massive commercial conglomerate that Bradley had been relentlessly courting for the past 8 months. Yes, Bradley sneered visibly, relishing what he believed was my terrified shock. Vanguard is signing a $50 million commercial lease with my firm this coming Monday. It is the biggest contract of my entire career. It is the deal that will finally put me in the nine-figure net worth category. Chloe's family is in a completely different league than you, Abigail. They have real wealth, real power, and real connections in this city. Her father pulls strings that you cannot even comprehend. So tread very carefully. Do not make her angry. Do not disrespect her, or I swear to you, I will make sure my lawyers drag this out until you leave this marriage with absolutely nothing but the cheap clothes on your back. Do you understand me? Chloe giggled a sharp, cruel sound, leaning her head against Bradley's shoulder. Just be a good little girl, Abigail, and maybe Bradley will let you keep that ugly apron as a parting gift. They stood there, a unified front of greed and betrayal, completely confident that they had outsmarted me. They thought I was just a naive, defenseless bookkeeper who had been utterly defeated by their brilliant legal maneuver. They thought they held all the power, all the leverage, and all the cards. But they were wrong. They were so incredibly wrong. They did not know the truth about my background because I had deliberately chosen to hide it. I had spent my entire adult life trying to build something of my own, refusing to rely on my family's colossal wealth and influence. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what my last name could buy. But standing in my kitchen, looking at the smug, arrogant faces of the man who had stolen my life, and the woman who was trying to replace me, the naive, devoted wife died forever. I wiped my hands on my dress. I did not scream. I did not throw the dinner plates. I did not collapse into a weeping, hysterical mess. A chilling, absolute calm washed over my entire body. I looked at Bradley's arrogant face and Chloe's victorious smirk. What Bradley did not know was that Vanguard Holdings, the massive conglomerate he was banking his entire future on, was just a small regional subsidiary of my father's global empire. My father, Harrison, is the chairman and majority shareholder of the parent corporation. And after years of establishing my own independence, my father and I had recently reconciled in secret. I did not argue. I silently pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened my messages, selected my father's private encrypted number, and typed 3 simple letters. SOS. I attached a quick photo I snapped of Bradley and Chloe standing smugly in my kitchen, adding a brief caption explaining the situation. I hit send. Exactly 3 minutes passed in an agonizing, heavy silence. Chloe was in the middle of mocking the simple floral centerpiece on my dining table when Bradley's cell phone suddenly began to ring frantically. It was his lead broker. I stood perfectly still and watched as Bradley answered the call. I watched the arrogant color drain completely from his face, leaving him as pale as a ghost. The $50 million Vanguard contract had just been frozen indefinitely by the corporate executive board, effectively pushing Bradley's over-leveraged, financially fragile firm to the very brink of immediate bankruptcy. Panic set in instantly. Bradley began sweating profusely, pacing the kitchen, screaming frantically into his phone, demanding answers from a broker who had none to give. Chloe looked confused and annoyed, demanding he put the phone down and pay attention to her. I simply picked up my wine glass, took a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive red wine, and played the innocent, confused victim. The war had just begun, and they had absolutely no idea that the quiet housewife they tried to discard was the one holding the executioner's axe. I stood perfectly still in the center of the kitchen. The heat from the open oven door still radiated against the back of my legs, a stark contrast to the absolute glacier that was rapidly forming in my chest. A normal woman might have collapsed onto the pristine hardwood floor. A normal woman might have screamed, thrown the heavy porcelain roasting pan at the wall, or lunged at the 26-year-old marketing consultant who was currently standing in my home, running a manicured hand down my husband's arm. I felt the overwhelming urge to do all of those things for about 5 seconds. The adrenaline spiked, making my fingertips buzz, and my vision blur. But then, as I stared at Bradley's incredibly smug, arrogant face, something inside me completely snapped. The devoted, naive, self-sacrificing Abigail died right there on the kitchen tiles. In her place, a chilling, absolute calm washed over every single nerve in my body. It was a coldness so profound it almost felt peaceful. I looked at Chloe. She was practically vibrating with a victorious smirk, clearly reveling in the fact that she had conquered the older, boring housewife. She thought her father, the regional vice president of Vanguard Holdings, made her royalty. She thought she held the keys to Bradley's entire universe. What neither of them knew, what I had kept buried deep beneath layers of thrift store sweaters and quiet bookkeeping, was the actual truth of my bloodline. Vanguard Holdings was certainly a massive commercial real estate conglomerate, but it was merely one regional subsidiary under the umbrella of a much larger global empire. An empire completely owned and operated by a man named Harrison. Harrison is a billionaire titan of industry, a man whose mere whisper can dictate the financial markets. He's also my father. When I met Bradley 6 years ago, I intentionally hid my family's colossal wealth. I wanted a normal life. I wanted a man who loved me for my mind, my heart and my drive, not for the inheritance attached to my last name. My father had violently disapproved of Bradley from the very beginning, calling him a hollow suit with more ambition than actual talent. That argument caused a massive rift between my father and me. I walked away from the family fortune to prove I could build a life from scratch. I poured my own modest savings into Bradley's startup. I sacrificed my own brilliant career in mergers and acquisitions to manage his books in the shadows. But 3 months ago, after realizing how heavily Bradley was taking my sacrifices for granted, I secretly reached out to my father. We had a long emotional reconciliation over a private lunch in Manhattan. He promised to let me live my life, but he also quietly positioned Vanguard Holdings to do business with Bradley, purely to keep a watchful, protective eye on my husband's firm. Bradley thought his brilliant networking had landed the Vanguard deal. He had absolutely no idea that the $50 million contract was a quiet gift from his estranged father-in-law. I slowly reached for the dish towel draped over the oven handle and meticulously wiped the flour and grease from my hands. My gaze, which had been wide with faint shock just moments before, sharpened into a lethal, unblinking stare. I did not utter a single word of protest. I did not beg Bradley to reconsider our marriage. I simply reached into the deep pocket of my dress and pulled out my smartphone. My thumb moved with practiced machine-like precision. I opened my messages and scrolled down to my father's private, highly encrypted number. I raised the phone slightly, making sure the camera lens captured the full scene. I snapped a crystal clear photograph of Bradley and Chloe standing side by side in my kitchen. Bradley was looking down at his phone with a bored expression, and Chloe was reapplying her glossy red lipstick using the reflection of my stainless steel refrigerator. Below the picture, I typed 3 simple letters. SOS. I pressed send. I knew my father. I knew the terrifying speed and ruthless efficiency with which he operated. I slid the phone back into my pocket and mentally started a countdown. Exactly 3 minutes. That was all it would take. The silence in the kitchen was thick and agonizing, broken only by the sound of Chloe's sharp laughter. She walked over to the kitchen island, tracing her perfectly manicured finger along the granite countertop. "You know, Bradley," she whined, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "this kitchen is so outdated. When we move in, we are going to have to gut this entire space. I cannot stand this dark wood. It feels like a cheap suburban nightmare. And look at this." She pointed a long acrylic fingernail directly at the simple knitted cardigan I was wearing over my dress. She let out a condescending sigh. "No offense, Abigail, but your wardrobe is completely tragic. It screams bargain bin. When you're standing next to a successful, powerful man like Bradley, you have to look the part. You have to reflect his status. My father always says that a man's wife is his most important business asset. Clearly you failed the assignment. I mean, look at you. You're practically fading into the wallpaper." Bradley poured himself a generous glass of my expensive red wine, completely ignoring the cruelty of her words. He took a sip and nodded in agreement. "Chloe is right, Abigail. You let yourself go. You stopped trying. You became entirely absorbed in balance sheets and grocery lists. I need a woman who commands attention. I need a partner who can walk into a room of elite investors and command absolute respect. Chloe has that natural pedigree. Her family understands the stakes. Your idea of a big night is watching a movie on the couch. It is just not going to work anymore." I listened to their horrific self-righteous dialogue, keeping my expression perfectly blank. 2 minutes had passed. I could feel the invisible gears of my father's corporate machine turning miles away. I pictured Harrison sitting in his towering corner office, seeing the photo of the man who was currently breaking his daughter's heart and picking up his direct line to the Vanguard corporate board. I knew the exact protocol. A single verbal command from the chairman was enough to trigger an immediate catastrophic halt to any subsidiary contract. Chloe wrapped her arms around Bradley's neck, pressing her body against his tailored suit. "So when is she leaving, baby?" she pouted, glaring at me over his shoulder. "Because I already ordered new silk sheets for the master bedroom, and I do not want her cheap perfume lingering in the house." "She has 3 days," Bradley replied smoothly, kissing the top of Chloe's head. "By Monday morning, when I head downtown to officially sign the Vanguard lease, she will be completely out of our hair. Then we can start fresh. With that $50 million contract secured, my firm will double in valuation overnight. I will finally be in the 9-figure club right where I belong." Just as the words left his arrogant mouth, the sharp, piercing ringtone of Bradley's cell phone shattered the tension in the room. He pulled it from his jacket pocket, glanced at the caller identification, and smiled broadly. "It is my lead broker," he announced, his voice swelling with pride. "He is probably calling to confirm the final signing time with the Vanguard executives for Monday morning. See, Abigail, this is what real success looks like." Bradley swiped the screen to answer, placing the phone to his ear with a triumphant flourish. "Yes, David talked to me. We are all set for Monday, right?" I stood perfectly still, my hands resting lightly on the cool granite counter. I watched his face. I watched the exact moment his entire world collapsed. It happened in slow motion. First, the arrogant smile faltered the corners of his mouth, drooping as he listened to the frantic voice barking on the other end of the line. Then his eyes widened in absolute sheer terror. The healthy, confident flush of color drained completely from his cheeks, leaving his face a sickly ashen gray. His shoulders slumped, and his hand began to tremble so violently that the ice in Chloe's water glass rattled. "What do you mean they pulled the contract?" Bradley screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate shriek. The kitchen walls seemed to vibrate with the sheer volume of his panic. "That is impossible. We spent 8 months negotiating this lease. Richard Sterling personally guaranteed it. What do you mean the corporate board froze it? Who the hell authorized a total freeze on a Friday night?" I watched him pace frantically across the hardwood floor, running his free hand through his perfectly styled hair until it was a disheveled mess. The broker on the other end was clearly delivering catastrophic news. Bradley's firm was heavily over-leveraged. He had taken out massive high-interest bridge loans to finance his upcoming projects, using the impending Vanguard contract as the sole collateral. Without that $50 million lease, his company was not just in trouble, it was mathematically, undeniably bankrupt. "You have to fix this, David." Bradley was hyperventilating now, gasping for air as if the room had suddenly run out of oxygen. "Call Richard. Call the Vanguard executives. Tell them we will renegotiate the terms. If that contract does not sign on Monday, the banks will call in my loans by Wednesday. I will lose everything. The firm, the commercial properties, the cars, everything. You have to get them back to the table." Chloe uncrossed her arms, her triumphant smirk completely vanishing. She took a step toward him, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. "Bradley, baby, what is going on?" she asked, her high-pitched voice laced with genuine panic. "What do you mean you're going to lose everything? My father promised that contract was a done deal. He said you were a safe investment." "Shut up, Chloe," Bradley snapped, turning on her with a vicious, wild look in his eyes. "Just shut up for 1 second. David, listen to me. I need you to find out who ordered the freeze. Go over Richard's head if you have to. Find out who killed my deal." The broker's answer must have been devastating because Bradley slowly lowered the phone from his ear. His jaw was slack. His eyes were wide and hollow, staring blankly at the kitchen cabinets. He looked like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. "They said the order came directly from the parent company," Bradley whispered, his voice trembling with sheer disbelief. "The chairman of the global board personally ordered an immediate permanent freeze on all dealings with my firm. They blacklisted me. I am finished." Chloe gasped, taking a stumbling step backward. Her face turned chalk white. "But my father," she stammered, "my father is the regional vice president. He can fix this. He can call the chairman." "Your father has no power over the global chairman, Chloe," Bradley shouted, his voice echoing with a raw, unadulterated despair. "The chairman is a billionaire titan. He does not even know I exist. Why would he personally intervene to destroy my company on a Friday night? It makes absolutely no sense. We are bankrupt, Chloe. Do you hear me? We have absolutely nothing. The kitchen descended into a state of absolute chaotic panic. Bradley was pacing like a caged animal, sweating profusely, loosening his expensive silk tie as he frantically scrolled through his contacts, desperately trying to find someone, anyone, who could reverse the catastrophic financial ruin that had just crashed down upon his head. Chloe was standing by the island, trembling, her face buried in her hands, whining and demanding that Bradley explain how he was going to maintain the luxury lifestyle he had promised her. She was already realizing that the golden goose she had manipulated to steal was suddenly dead. I stood quietly near the oven. I did not gloat. I did not laugh. I simply reached over, picked up my long-stem crystal wineglass, and took a slow, deliberate sip of the expensive red wine. The taste was rich, complex, and incredibly satisfying. I looked at my husband, the man who had just tried to throw me away like yesterday's garbage, and I played my part to absolute perfection. Salute. Bradley. Oh my goodness, I said, making my voice sound appropriately fragile, innocent, and confused. I widened my eyes, putting on a flawless mask of bewildered concern. What is happening? Is the business in trouble? Is there anything I can do to help? Bradley glared at me, his eyes bloodshot with stress and sheer panic. You can do nothing, Abigail. He spat, his voice dripping with venom and terror. You do not understand high-level corporate finance. You do not understand how these billionaires operate. Just stay out of my way. I have to figure out how to save my entire life from collapsing. I lowered my eyes, pretending to be meek and submissive, completely hiding the cold, victorious fire that was burning brightly inside my chest. He had no idea. He had absolutely no idea that the quiet, boring housewife he had so casually discarded was the very architect of his total annihilation. He told me not to make his mistress angry because her family was in a different league. He was about to learn just how terrifying my league truly was. I took another slow sip of my wine, calmly planting the invisible seeds for my next move, ready to audit his entire existence and burn his corrupt empire to the ground. Bradley was in a total state of hysteria. He grabbed his tailored suit jacket from the back of the kitchen stool, his hands shaking so violently he could barely maintain his grip on his expensive leather briefcase. Chloe was whining loudly, tugging at his sleeve, demanding to know what was going to happen to her new car and the luxury shopping trip they had planned for the upcoming weekend. He turned on her with a vicious, terrified snarl, telling her to take a cab home and leave him alone. He did not even look at me. He just bolted out the front door, slamming it so hard, the framed photographs in the hallway rattled violently against the drywall. I stood perfectly still in the kitchen and listened to the sharp screech of his tires as his luxury sedan sped out of the driveway, tearing down the street toward his downtown office to desperately attempt damage control. Chloe let out an exaggerated sigh of frustration, grabbed her designer handbag, and stomped out the front door without a single glance in my direction. The heavy, suffocating silence of the empty house settled around me. I looked at the perfectly roasted chicken sitting on the granite counter, the unlit taper candles, and the crystal wine glasses. I walked over to the stainless steel sink and poured the rest of my expensive red wine straight down the drain. The act of playing the terrified, submissive wife was officially over. My pulse slowed to a steady, rhythmic beat. The frantic adrenaline that had been surging through my veins faded entirely, replaced by a glacial, calculating focus. I was no longer Abigail, the devoted, naive homemaker. I was Abigail, the senior forensic auditor, and I had a job to do. I walked down the long hallway toward the back of the house, my footsteps completely silent against the thick carpet. Bradley kept his home office locked at all times. He always claimed it was a strict legal necessity to protect sensitive client information from the weekly cleaning service. But I knew better. I stopped in front of the heavy oak door. He genuinely thought I was just a gullible bookkeeper who only knew how to categorize basic utility bills and grocery receipts. He had completely forgotten the entire decade I spent tearing apart multinational corporate ledgers for the most prestigious financial firms in the country. He thought a simple brass lock could keep me out. I walked into the adjacent laundry room, reached up to the very top shelf, and retrieved the spare brass key he had hidden inside an empty coffee tin 5 years ago. He was so incredibly arrogant, so utterly predictable. I slid the key into the lock. With a sharp, satisfying click, the heavy door opened. The office was perfectly organized, smelling strongly of his expensive sandalwood cologne and the stale mints he always kept in a crystal bowl on his desk. I closed the door quietly behind me and locked it from the inside, sealing myself inside his private sanctuary. I walked over to his massive mahogany desk and sat down in his high back leather executive chair. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint amber glow of the streetlights filtering through the heavy wooden blinds. I reached forward and pressed the power button on his sleek silver laptop. The machine hummed to life, casting a harsh, bright light across my face. A password prompt appeared on the crisp screen. Bradley was a creature of intense vanity and staggering ego. He never used complex security protocols because he fundamentally believed no one around him was smart enough to check his work, let alone his quiet, obedient wife. I rested my fingers on the cool keyboard. I did not even have to guess. I typed in Chloe, followed by the numbers of her birth date, a date I had seen on her tax forms just 2 weeks prior. I hit the enter key. The screen unlocked instantly, revealing his cluttered private desktop. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped my throat. It was almost insulting how easy he made it. He left the digital front door wide open for the very woman he planned to throw away. I leaned forward, the icy detachment taking full control of my mind. I opened his financial directories. I bypassed the standard bookkeeping folders I usually managed and dove straight into the hidden, encrypted partitions he thought were completely invisible to a casual observer. It took me less than 10 minutes to break through his basic secondary firewalls using standard auditing software tools I had secretly installed on our home network months ago. The deeper I dug into the digital ledgers, the colder my blood ran. The files were a chaotic, sprawling mess of numbers, but to me they spoke a very clear, very damning language. I opened a folder labeled Residential Assets. My eyes scanned a digitized document that made my stomach churn with a violent, sickening twist. It was a secondary mortgage agreement on our beautiful marital home. The house we lived in, the house I had paid the entire down payment for with my own hard-earned savings before we were even married. Bradley had taken out a massive loan against the equity of our home, extracting hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid cash. I scrolled down to the final page of the legal document. There, sitting right next to his signature, was mine. It was a flawless, deliberate forgery. He had copied my handwriting perfectly, likely tracing it from our marriage certificate or our joint tax returns. A wave of profound violation washed over me. He had not just cheated on me with another woman, he had financially assaulted me. He had weaponized the safety of the roof over my head to fund his deceit. If his firm collapsed on Monday due to the frozen Vanguard contract, the bank would foreclose on this house immediately, leaving me legally responsible for a mountain of debt I never agreed to take on. My hands gripped the edge of the mahogany desk so tightly my knuckles turned stark white. He planned to leave me bankrupt, homeless, and drowning in fraudulent debt while he started a new life. I forced myself to breathe evenly. Anger is completely useless without concrete evidence. I needed the full picture. I clicked out of the property folder and opened the master ledgers for his commercial real estate firm. I systematically cross-referenced the firm's operating accounts against the supposedly untouchable client escrow accounts. What I found next transformed this from a simple, greedy divorce case into a staggering multi-million-dollar federal crime. Bradley was running a classic, highly illegal shell game. He was systematically siphoning massive amounts of cash from his clients' protected escrow funds. He was moving the money through a series of dummy corporations registered in Delaware, washing the funds through fake vendor invoices, and then depositing the clean cash directly into his own private offshore accounts. He was robbing his commercial clients blind to maintain the grand illusion of being a wildly successful real estate tycoon. I opened the expense reports attached to those specific dummy corporations. The details were meticulously documented in his own arrogant hand. I saw a wire transfer for $85,000. The memo line simply read, "Marketing Transportation." I cross-referenced the routing number and found the final purchase receipt for a brand new luxury European sports car registered directly to Chloe. I dug further, my eyes rapidly scanning lines of illicit transactions. I found a string of massive repeated wire transfers totaling over $400,000, all funneled into a single real estate holding company. The address associated with the holding company was a high-end luxury penthouse condo, right in the absolute center of downtown Chicago. It was the exact same condo Chloe had posted pictures of on her social media, claiming her wealthy father had bought it for her as an early birthday present. The sheer magnitude of his betrayal was suffocating. Every late night, he claimed he was working to build our future. Every dinner he missed because he was supposedly stressed about securing new clients. He was actually stealing money to buy a secret, lavish life for his mistress. He was playing with federal wire fraud, moving stolen funds across state lines, and committing grand larceny on a daily basis. I read through his private email exchanges with his offshore banker. He was complaining about my frugal spending habits, calling me a financial burden, while simultaneously wiring hundreds of thousands of dollars to furnish Chloe's new living room. I leaned back in the chair, piecing his entire strategy together. He believed his impending $50 million contract with Vanguard Holdings would provide a massive enough commission to secretly repay the stolen escrow funds before the annual corporate audits noticed the missing money. It was a desperate high-wire juggling act. He was borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, assuming he was the smartest man in the entire city. But he had made one fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. He brought his mistress into my kitchen, shoved fraudulent divorce papers in my face, and threatened to destroy me using a company owned by my own father. He had handed me the exact motivation I needed to look under the hood of his corrupt empire. I reached into the bottom drawer of my personal filing cabinet and pulled out a high-capacity military-grade encrypted hard drive. I plugged it directly into the side of his sleek laptop. A small green light began to blink rapidly in the darkroom, signaling the connection. I highlighted every single folder on his desktop: the forged mortgage documents, the illegal escrow transfers, the purchase receipts for Chloe's car and penthouse condo, the dummy corporation registration papers, the offshore bank account routing numbers. I dragged the entire mountain of evidence onto my secure drive. A progress bar appeared on the bright screen calculating the massive data transfer time. It read 45 minutes. I sat back in the heavy leather chair and watched the green bar slowly fill. The silence of the house was profound, broken only by the soft, rhythmic hum of the laptop fan and the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. I did not feel sad anymore. The weeping, devastated woman who had prepared that anniversary chicken was entirely gone, burned away by the sheer audacity of his crimes. I reviewed the sentencing guidelines for wire fraud and embezzlement in my head. He was looking at decades in federal prison. I was no longer just a wronged, discarded wife seeking a fair divorce settlement. I was the executioner meticulously sharpening the blade of the guillotine, preparing to bring his entire world crashing down. The morning sun filtered through the heavy linen curtains of the living room, casting long, pale shadows across the hardwood floors I had painstakingly polished just 24 hours ago. I had not slept a single minute. My eyes burned with the gritty, dry exhaustion of a woman who had spent the entire night tearing down the invisible walls of her own life. The encrypted hard drive containing every piece of Bradley's fraudulent financial history was safely tucked away in the deep pocket of my thick wool cardigan. I sat on the bottom step of our grand wooden staircase, nursing a cup of black coffee that had long since gone cold. The house was eerily silent. Bradley had not returned from his frantic dash to the office. The crushing weight of the frozen Vanguard contract was undoubtedly tearing his corrupt firm apart piece by piece, and I was content to sit in the quiet aftermath of my own hidden strike. That fragile silence was violently shattered by the sound of a key aggressively turning in the heavy brass lock of the front door. The door burst open so hard it rebounded off the wall stopper with a loud cracking thud. I did not move. I just watched as Sarah Bradley's older sister marched into the entryway. Sarah was a licensed commercial real estate broker who worked directly under Bradley at his firm. She was a woman utterly consumed by vanity and status, draped, this morning in a camel-colored cashmere coat, an oversized designer silk scarf, and massive dark sunglasses that hid half her face. She held a towering stack of flattened cardboard moving boxes under one arm and a steaming iced latte in her free hand. Her sharp-pointed stiletto heels clicked like a metronome of impending doom against the entryway tiles. Ever since Bradley and I started dating, Sarah had made her absolute disdain for me perfectly clear. She thought I was too quiet, too plain, and entirely too frugal for a man destined for high society. She had always viewed my modesty as a character flaw rather than a virtue. She dropped the heavy stack of cardboard boxes directly onto the expensive Persian rug with a loud, dismissive smack. She pulled down her sunglasses, her heavily contoured eyes locking onto me sitting on the stairs. A vicious, predatory smile spread across her face. "Look at you," Sarah sneered, her voice echoing shrilly in the high-ceilinged foyer, sitting there looking like a pathetic, discarded stray dog. "Bradley told me he finally dropped the bomb on you last night. I brought you some boxes. I suggest you start packing up your cheap thrift store junk immediately. Chloe is coming by this afternoon with an interior designer to measure the living room for custom drapes, and the last thing she needs to see is your depressing, tear-stained face ruining the aesthetic." I gripped the cold ceramic mug in my hands, keeping my posture entirely submissive and small. The adrenaline from the previous night had completely faded, leaving behind a cold, crystalline focus. I knew exactly how to play this woman. Sarah was fueled by her own massive ego. She thrived on feeling superior. If I fought back, she would shut down and become defensive. But if I played the broken, defeated victim, she would not be able to resist the overwhelming urge to boast. "You cannot just throw me out, Sarah," I whispered, forcing my voice to crack and tremble. I let my shoulders slump forward, pulling the oversized cardigan tightly around my body as if I were freezing. "This is my home. Bradley and I built this life together. How can you be so cruel?" Sarah let out a loud, mocking laugh, tossing her silk scarf over her shoulder as she took a step closer to the stairs. "You built absolutely nothing, Abigail," she spat, crossing her arms over her expensive coat. "You sat in a back room categorizing utility bills while my brother was out there hustling to become a titan of industry. You were a starter wife. You were the safe, boring option he needed when he was just trying to get his firm off the ground. But Bradley is a major player now. He's entering the 9-figure club. Did you honestly think a man with his ambition was going to stay tethered to a woman who clips grocery coupons and bakes her own bread?" I buried my face in my free hand, letting out a soft manufactured sob. My chest heaved, presenting the perfect picture of a woman whose entire universe had just been obliterated. "He promised me," I cried softly, staring at the floorboards through my fingers. "He promised we were a team. I do not understand how he can afford to just start a brand new life with a woman he met 6 months ago. We do not have that kind of liquid cash, Sarah. You know we do not. How is he paying for everything?" The moment the question left my lips, I slowly slid my right hand into the deep pocket of my cardigan. My fingers brushed against the smooth glass screen of my smartphone. Without looking down, my thumb found the side button, woke the screen, and blindly tapped the center of the display where I had purposely left my voice recording application open. I felt the tiny haptic vibration confirming the recording had begun. Sarah took the bait with terrifying enthusiasm. She walked over to the bottom of the staircase, standing directly over me, physically looming to assert her dominance. Her vanity simply could not allow her to pass up an opportunity to show me exactly how much smarter and more sophisticated she was. "Oh, Abigail, you really are incredibly stupid," Sarah mocked, taking a casual sip of her iced latte. "You always thought you were so meticulous with your little spreadsheets, completely oblivious to how the real world actually operates. You think Bradley pays for things with his own checking account. Please, that is what amateurs do. We operate on an entirely different level." I looked up at her, keeping my eyes wide and swimming with unshed tears. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I handled the firm's operating accounts. I saw the balances. There was no money for a luxury condo downtown." Sarah rolled her eyes, shaking her head as if she were speaking to a slow child. "You handled the accounts Bradley allowed you to see," she corrected me, a triumphant gleam shining in her eyes. "But you never saw the escrow ledgers, did you? You never saw the massive cash deposits our commercial clients put down to secure their building leases. Bradley has millions of dollars sitting in trust accounts. When Chloe wanted that luxury penthouse in the financial district, Bradley did not use his own money. He used the firm's client funds." My heart hammered fiercely against my ribs, not from fear, but from the sheer electric thrill of the hunt. I was staring directly at a woman who was actively, voluntarily confessing to federal wire fraud and the illegal misappropriation of client funds. "But that is illegal," I gasped, pressing my hand against my chest in feigned horror. "The title companies run background checks. They audit the source of the funds, How could he possibly buy a condo using stolen escrow money without the bank flagging the transaction? Sarah let out a condescending sigh, clearly frustrated by my lack of criminal imagination. That is exactly why Bradley needs me, she boasted, gesturing proudly to herself. I am a licensed commercial real estate broker, Abigail. I know exactly how to bypass the red tape. I set up a dummy corporation in Delaware under Chloe's name. I routed the stolen escrow funds through 3 different holding accounts to wash the money clean. Then I personally filed the mortgage application and the deed of trust. I used my broker credentials to completely bypass the standard Know Your Customer regulations. I falsified Chloe's income statements to make it look like she was a high net worth investor, and I approved the sale myself. The bank never even looked twice because I put my professional seal on the paperwork. Chills ran violently down my spine. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her confession was almost difficult to process. I was a senior forensic auditor. I had spent a decade working alongside federal regulators to uncover complex corporate fraud. I knew exactly what Sarah had just admitted to. Falsifying mortgage applications is bank fraud. Bypassing federal anti-money laundering regulations is a massive felony. Funneling stolen client funds across state lines through shell companies is federal wire fraud. Each individual charge carried a maximum sentence of 20 years in federal prison, and she had just proudly detailed the entire criminal conspiracy step by step directly into the microphone of my hidden cell phone. I let my head drop down onto my knees. I began to weep audibly, allowing my shoulders to shake. I cannot believe this, I sobbed, keeping my voice muffled against my legs. You committed fraud, Sarah. You and Bradley are stealing from your own clients just to impress a young girl. What if you get caught? What if her father finds out? Sarah scoffed loudly, the ice rattling in her plastic cup. We are not going to get caught, Abigail. You are the only one who knows and who is going to believe a bitter, dumped housewife. Besides, Richard Sterling is the regional vice president of Vanguard Holdings. Once Bradley officially signs that $50 million lease agreement on Monday morning, the firm is going to receive a massive 7-figure commission payout upfront. Bradley is simply going to take that commission cash quietly, reimburse the client, escrow accounts he borrowed from, and balance the books before the end of the fiscal quarter. No one will ever know the money was temporarily missing. It is completely foolproof. I kept my face buried in my arms, hiding the cold, ruthless smile that was slowly spreading across my lips. She thought it was foolproof. She thought the Vanguard contract was going to save them. She had absolutely no idea that the massive $50 million lifeline they were desperately counting on had already been severed by my father the night before. Bradley was currently downtown frantically trying to stop the bleeding while his arrogant sister was standing in my hallway handing me the exact verbal confession I needed to secure a federal RICO indictment against both of them. You are monsters, I whispered weakly, playing the part of the morally outraged, powerless victim until the very bitter end. Both of you. You are destroying my life for nothing. Sarah stepped back, clearly bored with my emotional display. She adjusted her designer coat and looked down at me with absolute disgust. We are not monsters, Abigail. We are winners. And winners do whatever it takes to secure their legacy. Bradley is trading up to a woman whose family actually matters in this world. Chloe brings power, prestige, and endless corporate connections to the table. What do you bring? Nothing. You bring absolutely nothing but bad fashion and a depressing attitude. She walked over to the front door, pulling her heavy sunglasses back down over her eyes. She put her hand on the brass doorknob and glanced back at me sitting on the stairs. I want you out of this house by Sunday night, she commanded, her tone shifting into a sharp authoritarian bark. If you try to steal any of the furniture or damage the property, I will personally see to it that you are sued for vandalism. Pack your cheap junk and disappear, Abigail. Do not make this harder on yourself than it already is. She opened the heavy wooden door, letting a gust of cold morning air sweep into the foyer, and walked out without waiting for a response. She slammed the door behind her, the final resounding crack echoing sharply through the empty house. I sat on the bottom stair for a full 60 seconds, listening intently as the engine of her luxury SUV started in the driveway and slowly pulled away down the street. The moment the sound of her vehicle faded completely into the distance, my tears stopped instantly. The fragile, shaking posture I had maintained for the last 10 minutes vanished. I sat up perfectly straight, rolling my shoulders back to release the physical tension of the act. My breathing deepened, becoming slow, steady, and incredibly calm. I reached into the pocket of my thick wool cardigan and pulled out my smartphone. The screen was still glowing brightly in the dim light of the hallway. The voice recording application displayed a continuous rolling audio wave, 10 minutes and 42 seconds. I stared at the pulsing red circle on the screen, feeling the immense, undeniable weight of the weapon I was currently holding in my hand. I pressed the stop button. I saved the audio file, quickly renaming it with today's date and a single word: confession. I immediately uploaded the file to the military-grade encrypted hard drive, creating 3 separate backup copies across multiple secure cloud servers. I was not going to take any chances. The conflict had just dramatically shifted entirely. This was no longer just a messy, painful divorce over a cheating husband and a younger mistress. It was no longer just about a man trying to enforce a fraudulent post-nuptial agreement to kick his wife out of her own home. Bradley and Sarah had elevated their betrayal into a highly coordinated, multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. They had stolen client funds, committed federal bank fraud, and brazenly forged my signature to secure a second mortgage. Sarah left this house laughing, completely convinced she had humiliated me. She left boasting about her wealth, her intelligence, and her superiority. She had absolutely no idea that in her desperate need to stroke her own massive ego, she had just handed me the exact undeniable evidence required to completely obliterate her entire career, revoke her real estate license permanently, and send both her and her brother to a federal penitentiary for a very long time. I stood up from the cold wooden stairs, smoothing down the fabric of my dress. I walked past the stack of flattened cardboard moving boxes she had thrown on my expensive rug. I was not going to pack a single thing. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and pulled out my laptop. I had a meeting to schedule with my father's legal team, and I needed to prepare the guillotine. 2 days passed in a heavy, unbroken silence inside my home. Outside those walls, however, Bradley's entire financial universe was in an absolute terrifying freefall. I sat at my kitchen island with my laptop open, sipping a hot cup of black tea while securely monitoring the digital ledgers I had copied to my encrypted drive. The numbers painted a picture of pure, unadulterated panic. Vanguard Holdings was entirely silent. My father's executives were notoriously ruthless when they received a direct order from the chairman. They refused to return Bradley's frantic phone calls. They blocked his emails. They instructed the security desk at their corporate tower to deny him physical entry. Without that $50 million commercial lease agreement, Bradley was mathematically dead in the water. The massive high-interest bridge loans he had taken out to finance his upcoming projects were rapidly approaching their default dates. The stolen client escrow accounts were gaping, radioactive black holes in his balance sheet. He needed liquid cash immediately, or the federal bank regulators would automatically trigger an audit by the end of the fiscal quarter. He was bleeding out, and the sharks were already circling in the water. It was a gloomy, rain-soaked Wednesday afternoon when the heavy brass lock on the front door clicked open. I calmly closed my laptop screen and slid the machine under a neat stack of home decor magazines, just as Bradley stormed into the living room. The man who stood before me looked absolutely dreadful. The arrogant, polished real estate CEO, who prided himself on flawless tailored suits and perfect hair, now looked like a hunted, desperate animal. His expensive silk tie was missing. His designer dress shirt was wrinkled, untucked, and stained with spilled coffee. Deep, dark purple circles bruised the delicate skin under his bloodshot, exhausted eyes. The heavy, sour scent of stale sweat and sheer panic radiated off him, completely overpowering his usual expensive sandalwood cologne. He was not alone. Following closely behind him was a short, heavy-set man in a cheap, shiny gray suit carrying a battered leather briefcase. The man had a slick, predatory smile that immediately made my skin crawl. He looked exactly like the kind of sleazy, bottom-feeding lawyer who specialized in bullying vulnerable women and settling out of court for pennies on the dollar. "Abigail, sit down right now. We have business to conclude," Bradley barked. His voice was hoarse and ragged, completely shredded from 2 straight days of screaming at brokers and bankers over the telephone. I immediately slipped into my role. The cold, calculating forensic auditor vanished behind a flawless mask of terror. I clutched my hands to my chest, letting my breathing turn shallow and erratic. I slowly lowered myself onto the edge of the velvet living room sofa, keeping my knees tightly together and my eyes wide with manufactured fear. I looked from Bradley to the strange man, allowing my bottom lip to tremble visibly. Bradley did not even bother to sit down. He paced the length of the living room, his hands shaking as he rubbed his temples. He gestured aggressively toward the man in the gray suit. "This is my private attorney. He has drafted the final paperwork for your exit. I am a very busy man, Abigail, and I do not have time to drag this out in a courtroom. I need you to sign these documents today so we can be done with this miserable chapter." The sleazy lawyer stepped forward and opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and slapped them aggressively onto my glass coffee table. He leaned over, invading my personal space, his breath smelling strongly of stale tobacco and cheap peppermint gum. "Good afternoon, little lady," the lawyer said, his tone dripping with condescension. "What we have here is a standard quit-claim deed and a mutual separation agreement. Bradley is being incredibly generous today. If you sign this deed right now, legally transferring your remaining marital interest in this property entirely to him, he is willing to cut you a certified cashier's check for exactly $10,000. You can take that cash, pack your bags, and start a nice, quiet new life somewhere else." I stared at the documents on the glass table. $10,000. It was an insult so profound, it almost made me laugh out loud. The house we were standing in was worth over $1.5 million. I had paid the entire $200,000 down payment from my own personal savings before we were even married. And now this desperate cornered man was trying to bully me into signing away a massive real estate asset for the price of a used car, purely so he could immediately liquidate the house and use the cash to cover his stolen escrow accounts. I looked up at Bradley, letting tears well up in my eyes. $10,000, I whispered, my voice breaking pitifully. "Bradley, that is barely enough to cover rent and groceries for a few months. How am I supposed to survive? Where am I supposed to go?" Bradley stopped pacing and glared at me with absolute disgust. "That is not my problem anymore, Abigail. You are lucky I'm giving you anything at all. You signed a post-nuptial agreement 2 years ago. Legally, I do not have to give you a single dime, but I'm a good man. I am doing you a massive favor by offering you this cash settlement. Just sign the damn paper so I can sell this house and move on with my life." I reached out with a trembling hand and lightly touched the edge of the quit-claim deed. I knew exactly what this document was. I knew exactly how it worked in property law. But I needed to stall him. I needed to keep him trapped in his own web of panic until the weekend, giving my father's legal team enough time to silently purchase the distressed debt on his second mortgage. I pulled my hand back as if the paper had burned me. I looked at the lawyer with wide, innocent eyes, expertly playing the role of a completely uneducated, gullible housewife. "I do not understand these words," I cried softly, pointing at the legal jargon. "What does in perpetuity mean? What is a conveyance of title? Does this mean I lose the kitchen appliances I bought last year? I cannot sign something I do not understand. I need to talk to a public defender first." The sleazy lawyer let out a loud, mocking snort. He looked over his shoulder at Bradley and rolled his eyes, clearly amused by my profound ignorance. "A public defender?" The lawyer chuckled cruelly. "Little lady, public defenders are for criminals who rob gas stations. This is a civil real estate matter. You do not get a free government lawyer to hold your hand through a divorce. You either sign the paper and take the $10,000 today, or you walk out the front door with absolutely nothing." I buried my face in my hands and began to weep loudly, my shoulders shaking with manufactured despair. "Please, Bradley," I begged through my fake sobs. "Please, just give me a few days to read this over. I am so confused. I just need time to find a cheap lawyer to explain these big words to me. I promise I will not cause any trouble. I just need until the end of the week. Please do not force me to sign something I cannot even read properly." Bradley clenched his fist, his jaw ticking with extreme frustration. He looked at me crying on the sofa and completely bought the act. He saw exactly what he wanted to see. He saw a weak, pathetic, financially illiterate woman who posed absolutely no threat to his grand criminal empire. He believed I was completely harmless, just a stupid obstacle slowing him down. "Fine," Bradley shouted, slamming his hand down hard on the coffee table, making the legal documents jump. "You have until Sunday morning, Abigail. Not 1 minute longer. but you listen to me very carefully because my patience is completely gone. I peered up at him through my fingers, my eyes red and watery. He leaned down, placing both hands on his knees so his face was just inches from mine. His breath was ragged, his eyes wild with the desperate, frantic energy of a man drowning in his own lies. I am throwing a massive exclusive engagement gala at the Oak Brook Country Club this Saturday night. Bradley announced, his voice vibrating with a toxic mix of arrogance and sheer panic. It is going to be the most lavish, expensive party this city has seen all year. I am officially announcing my engagement to Chloe in front of all her family's wealthy friends and corporate elite. I stared at him in genuine shock. His firm was entirely bankrupt. He was bleeding cash and actively dodging federal loan defaults. Yet in a desperate last-ditch effort to appease Chloe and impress her wealthy father Richard, he was going to burn whatever stolen money he had left on a spectacular display of fake wealth. He honestly believed that if he threw a grand enough party, Richard would be so dazzled by his success that the Vanguard executive would leverage his vice president position to unfreeze the $50 million contract on Monday morning. It was a spectacular, delusional gamble. Richard was furious when Vanguard froze the contract yesterday. Bradley continued spitting the words at me as if it were entirely my fault. Chloe has been crying non-stop. She thinks I lied about my net worth. I have to prove to them that I'm a titan in this industry. I have to show Richard that I am a man of immense resources. Once he sees the gala, once he sees how much money I am willing to spend on his daughter, he will make the calls to his corporate board and fix the lease agreement. I will have my $50 million by Monday afternoon. The sheer audacity of his plan was almost poetic. He was going to gather every wealthy investor, every corporate contact, and every member of Chloe's high society family into one single room. He was building the perfect, glittering stage for his own public execution, and he was inviting all the witnesses himself. Bradley stood up straight, towering over me, with a look of absolute lethal warning. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. You are expressly forbidden from coming anywhere near that country club on Saturday night, Abigail. Do you understand me? You are not to show your face. You are not to call me. You are to stay locked inside this house like a ghost. Because if you show up in your cheap clothes, if you cause a scene and ruin my night with Chloe, I will not even give you the $10,000. I will drag you through civil court until you are entirely bankrupt, and I will throw you out on the street to starve. I looked up at his furious, sweating face. I let my bottom lip tremble one last time. I gave him exactly what his massive ego demanded. I slowly, submissively nodded my head. I understand, Bradley. I whispered meekly, dropping my gaze to the floor. I will stay here. I will not ruin your party. Good. Bradley sneered, grabbing his briefcase from the floor. He turned to the sleazy lawyer, running a hand through his disheveled hair. Let us get out of here. I have to go to the country club to finalize the catering deposit. They are demanding $50,000 in liquid cash by 5 o'clock, and I have to pull it from the corporate marketing budget. The lawyer nodded, offering me one last condescending smirk before following Bradley out of the living room. I sat perfectly still on the velvet sofa, listening to their heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. I heard the front door open and slam shut. I heard the engine of Bradley's car roar to life, and the tires screech as he sped away to secure his lavish doomed party. The house fell back into a deep, comforting silence. The rain continued to patter softly against the tall glass windows of the living room. The pathetic, weeping housewife vanished into the cold air. I slowly sat up straight. I reached out and picked up the quitclaim deed from the glass coffee table, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. He thought I needed a public defender to understand a simple property transfer. He thought he could buy my silence for $10,000 while he stole $50,000 to buy cheap caviar for his mistress. I calmly tore the legal document exactly in half, then into quarters, dropping the shredded pieces of paper into the empty wastebasket next to the sofa. A cold, victorious smile spread across my face. Bradley was desperate. He was cornered, and like any desperate animal, he was rushing blindly into the trap. He wanted to throw the biggest, most expensive party in the city to announce his grand new life. He wanted an audience of elite high society figures to witness his ultimate triumph. I would gladly let him have his stage. I would let him invite the entire world to watch, because on Saturday night, I would not be hiding like a ghost. I would be walking through the front doors of the Oak Brook Country Club, backed by the full terrifying power of the Vanguard Empire, ready to deliver the fatal blow. I watched from the living room window as the taillights of Bradley's car disappeared completely into the grey, rain-soaked afternoon. The heavy silence of the house pressed against my ears, but for the first time in 6 years, it did not feel like a cage. It felt like a staging ground. I walked over to the hallway mirror, wiped away the last remnants of the fake tears I had shed for my husband and his sister, and smoothed down my hair. I took a deep, steadying breath. The time for playing the helpless, naive housewife was officially over. Exactly 5 minutes later, a sleek jet-black town car glided silently up my driveway. Its heavily tinted windows and flawless exterior stood in stark contrast to the mundane suburban street. The driver, a tall man in a tailored dark suit, stepped out into the rain with a large black umbrella and opened the rear door for me. I did not look back at the house. I simply stepped out into the cold air, clutching my heavy wool cardigan with the encrypted hard drive safely tucked inside the pocket, and slid into the luxurious leather interior of the vehicle. The door closed with a solid, expensive thud, instantly silencing the sound of the rain. The driver did not say a single word. He already knew exactly where we were going. We merged onto the highway, speeding directly toward the towering skyline of Manhattan. I watched the gray clouds roll over the city, feeling a profound transformation taking place inside my very bones. The fear and the betrayal that had paralyzed me just 24 hours ago were completely gone. They had burned away, leaving behind a cold, indestructible core of pure titanium. I was returning to the world I had left behind. The town car pulled smoothly into the secure underground parking garage of a massive gleaming glass skyscraper in the heart of the financial district. This was the global headquarters of Vanguard Holdings. It was a fortress of absolute wealth and unparalleled corporate power. 2 armed security guards immediately approached the vehicle, nodding respectfully as my driver escorted me directly to a private biometric elevator reserved exclusively for the corporate board. I placed my hand flat against the cool glass of the scanner, and the heavy metal door slid shut. The elevator shot upward with dizzying speed, bypassing all 70 floors of regular corporate offices and stopping only at the very top. The doors opened to reveal an expansive hushed reception area decorated in dark mahogany and brushed steel. The air smelled faintly of expensive espresso and rich leather. I walked down the long silent corridor toward the main executive boardroom. I did not knock. I simply pushed open the towering double doors and stepped inside. The boardroom was enormous, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city. Sitting at the head of a massive granite conference table was my father, Harrison. He wore an immaculate charcoal suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, radiating the terrifying absolute authority of a billionaire titan who commanded global markets. But the moment his sharp blue eyes locked onto mine, the ruthless corporate predator vanished. He stood up immediately, pushing his heavy leather chair back, and walked swiftly across the room. He wrapped his strong arms around me, pulling me into a tight, fiercely protective embrace. I closed my eyes and let my forehead rest against his shoulder. For just a brief second, I allowed myself to feel the exhaustion of the past few days. "I am so sorry, Abigail." My father whispered, his deep voice thick with emotion. "I should have never let that parasitic coward near you. You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for." "Dad," I replied, stepping back and meeting his gaze with absolute clarity. "I made my own choices, but now I am choosing to fix them." My father looked at my face, searching for any sign of brokenness or despair. When he found only a cold, calculating fire burning in my eyes, a slow, incredibly proud smile spread across his face. "That is my girl," he said, his voice ringing with pure satisfaction. "You are a vanguard. We do not cry over bad investments. We liquidate them." He led me toward the massive conference table. I realized then that we were not alone in the room. Sitting along the right side of the table were 3 individuals radiating intense, quiet professionalism. My father gestured to them smoothly. "Abigail, this is my lead corporate counsel, David Vance, and his senior litigation partner." And sitting next to them is Special Agent Miller from the Financial Crimes Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Agent Miller is a close personal friend of the family. I nodded respectfully to the men and took the seat directly to my father's right. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan, pulled out the encrypted hard drive, and placed it onto the cool granite table. The small piece of metal landed with a sharp, heavy click. I did not come here just to finalize a divorce, I announced, projecting my voice so it carried clearly to the end of the long room. I came here to orchestrate a complete scorched earth annihilation. Bradley and his sister Sarah are running a highly coordinated criminal syndicate. They have stolen millions of dollars from their commercial escrow accounts to fund luxury real estate purchases, and they have committed federal bank fraud by forging my signature on a secondary mortgage. I slid the hard drive across the table toward the federal agent. Agent Miller plugged the drive into his secure laptop. I gave him the decryption keys and watched as the staggering mountain of digital evidence populated on his screen. The room fell into a deep, focused silence as the men reviewed the bank statements, the IP address logs, and the explicit wire transfer receipts linking Bradley's corporate accounts to his mistress's downtown penthouse. Then I instructed the agent to open the audio file labeled Confession. The crisp, clear audio of Sarah's arrogant voice filled the expansive boardroom. Her haughty bragging echoed off the glass walls. I used my broker credentials to completely bypass the standard regulations. I falsified Chloe's income statements to make it look like she was a high net worth investor, and I approved the sale myself. The bank never even looked twice because I put my professional seal on the paperwork. When the recording finished, Agent Miller closed his laptop and looked up at me with profound astonishment. His eyes were wide with genuine professional respect. "Mrs. Vanguard," he said, his tone entirely shifted from polite to deeply serious. "In my 15 years of investigating financial crimes, I have never been handed a case this flawlessly prepared. You have provided a perfectly mapped money trail, documentary evidence of wire fraud, and a voluntary recorded confession to federal bank fraud. This is an absolute slam dunk. I can have federal arrest warrants drafted and signed by a judge within 48 hours. My father leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers beneath his chin. "We are not just going to arrest him," Harrison stated, his voice dropping into a dangerously low, lethal register. "Arresting him is far too easy. We are going to strip him of every single thing he values before the handcuffs even touch his wrists. I want his reputation destroyed. I want his financial future completely pulverized. David, tell my daughter what you have secured." The lead corporate lawyer adjusted his glasses and opened a thick red file folder on the table. "Abigail," he began, his tone sharp and clinical. "Per your father's instructions last night, my team immediately went to work on Bradley's secondary mortgage. The loan he fraudulently took out against your marital home was held by a private mid-tier lender. Because Bradley's firm is currently showing massive signs of financial distress, that lender was incredibly nervous about a potential default. We utilized a shell corporation entirely controlled by Vanguard Holdings to purchase the distressed debt at a premium this morning. I felt a thrilling electric shock run straight down my spine. I looked at the lawyer, my mind rapidly processing the sheer brilliance of the maneuver. "So Vanguard owns the debt?" I asked, leaning forward. "You own the debt?" Abigail, the lawyer, corrected me with a sharp smile. "The Shell Corporation is registered directly in your name. As of 2 hours ago, you are officially your husband's primary creditor. Because his payment is technically 3 days past due, you now possess the absolute legal right to demand immediate repayment in full. If he cannot produce the liquid cash, which we know for a fact he cannot, you have the unilateral authority to seize his business assets, freeze his operating accounts, and foreclose on the property. He thought he was trapping you with a forged mortgage. He actually handed you the exact legal instrument required to bankrupt him overnight. The sheer perfection of the counterattack was intoxicating. I looked at my father, feeling a massive wave of gratitude and fierce admiration. We had trapped Bradley in an inescapable, suffocating vice. The federal government was coming for his freedom, and I was coming for his entire empire. "But there is one more detail," I said, turning my attention back to the group. "Bradley is throwing a massive engagement gala this Saturday night at the Oak Brook Country Club. He plans to publicly announce his upcoming marriage to Chloe. He invited every major commercial investor in the city, including Chloe's father, Richard. Bradley firmly believes that if he throws a grand enough party, Richard will use his position as a regional vice president at Vanguard Holdings to unfreeze his $50 million contract. My father let out a booming, humorless laugh that sent a terrifying chill through the boardroom. Richard is a middle management fool who vastly overstepped his authority. Harrison growled, his blue eyes flashing with pure rage. He authorized preliminary contract negotiations with a corrupt vendor simply to secure a wealthy husband for his spoiled daughter. I have already drafted Richard's immediate termination papers. His entire career in corporate finance is officially over. Then we do it on Saturday, I said, my voice cutting through the room with absolute unwavering certainty. We do not arrest Bradley in his home. We do not serve him foreclosure papers in private. We do it at the gala. We do it in front of every single investor he lied to, in front of the high society friends he desperately wants to impress, and in front of the mistress who called me a boring housewife. I want him at the absolute height of his arrogance when we cut the floor out from under him. Agent Miller nodded slowly, clearly impressed by the ruthlessness of the plan. I can arrange for a federal task force to be on standby outside the country club on Saturday night, he confirmed. We will wait for your signal, Abigail. Once you have exposed the financial fraud to the guests, my team will move in and execute the arrest warrants for both Bradley and his sister Sarah. The meeting continued for another hour as we meticulously scripted out every single second of the upcoming execution. We discussed asset seizures, press releases, and the swift legal maneuvering required to isolate Chloe and her disgraced father. I absorbed every detail, my mind operating with the flawless, rapid precision of a supercomputer. For years, I had deliberately dimmed my own light to allow a mediocre man to feel like a giant. I had folded myself into the background, washing dishes and balancing budgets in silence, completely convinced that my sacrifices were building a loving, loyal partnership. But standing in this boardroom, surrounded by immense power and absolute loyalty, I realized that I was never meant to be a background character. I was born into a legacy of titans, and I was stepping back onto my rightful throne. As the lawyers and the federal agent packed up their briefcases and left the boardroom, my father walked over to me. He placed his large, warm hands on my shoulders and looked down at me with immense pride. "You have endured a terrible betrayal, my brilliant girl," he said softly. "But on Saturday night, you will show them exactly what happens when you awaken a sleeping dragon." I looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling, glittering expanse of New York City below. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets washed clean and shimmering in the afternoon light. I thought about Chloe mocking my clothes. I thought about Sarah laughing at my tears. I thought about Bradley smirking as he handed me those fraudulent divorce papers. I felt no fear. I felt absolutely no hesitation. I simply nodded my head, a cold, victorious smile forming on my lips. I will not be hiding in the shadows anymore, I promised my father. I will be attending that gala, and I am bringing the full terrifying weight of the Vanguard Empire with me. Saturday night arrived with a heavy downpour that washed the streets of Chicago clean. I sat in the plush leather backseat of the jet-black town car that my father had sent for me. The thick-tinted windows shielded me from the outside world as we drove toward the exclusive Oak Brook Country Club. For the past 6 years, I had played the role of the quiet and submissive housewife. I had worn cheap sweaters and modest skirts. I had clipped coupons and managed household budgets while Bradley pretended to be a titan of the real estate industry. But tonight, the frightened and betrayed woman was completely dead. In her place sat a woman forged from pure titanium and backed by the absolute terrifying power of the Vanguard corporate empire. My pulse was a slow and steady drumbeat. I did not feel a single drop of fear or hesitation. I only felt a cold and lethal anticipation. The town car glided smoothly up the sweeping circular driveway of the country club. The massive stone pillars and glowing lantern lights of the building loomed in the dark, rainy night. The driver stopped the vehicle directly in front of the grand entrance and quickly stepped out to open my door with a large black umbrella. I stepped out into the cool, damp air. The valet attendants, standing near the entrance, stopped what they were doing and stared at me with wide eyes. I was no longer wearing the muted, drab colors of a defeated woman. I was wearing a stunning, custom-tailored emerald green silk evening gown. The deep jewel-tone fabric draped perfectly across my body and pooled elegantly around my silver stiletto heels. My hair was swept up into a flawless and sophisticated twist. A magnificent diamond necklace rested against my collarbone, catching the ambient light and reflecting it in a dazzling display of genuine wealth. I radiated absolute power and uncompromising confidence. I walked up the wide stone steps and approached the heavy glass double doors of the country club. The muffled sound of a live jazz band playing a lively tune thumped through the thick glass. I handed my coat to a completely stunned attendant in the opulent lobby and turned my attention toward the main ballroom. The sheer scale and extravagance of the event hit me like a physical wave. The massive room was absolutely dripping with stolen luxury. Towering floral arrangements of rare white orchids and imported pink peonies exploded from tall crystal vases on every single table. Thousands of delicate golden fairy lights were woven through sheer silk fabric that draped dramatically across the vaulted ceiling. A small army of waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated through the dense crowd of high society guests, carrying silver trays piled high with expensive vintage champagne and premium caviar. Every single detail of the room was designed to project an image of limitless wealth and elite status. It was a breathtaking and flawless display of total financial success, and every single penny of it was stolen. I stood near the entrance and allowed my icy gaze to slowly scan the crowded room. I looked at the shimmering crystal chandeliers and the wealthy investors laughing with their expensive drinks. Bradley was actively burning through the stolen money from his commercial client escrow accounts to buy these exotic flowers and pour this vintage champagne. He was financing his own grand illusion of success with the hard-earned money of innocent people. He was committing federal wire fraud right out in the open simply to impress a group of shallow socialites. The sheer breathtaking audacity of his criminal behavior made my stomach churn, but my face remained a perfect mask of cold detachment. The entire corporate elite of the city was gathered in this room. They were completely unaware that they were participating in a lavish party funded entirely by a bankrupt criminal. It did not take me very long to spot my targets. Bradley and Chloe were holding court in the very center of the expansive ballroom. They were standing directly beneath the largest and brightest crystal chandelier, like a fake king and his fraudulent queen. Bradley was wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His dark hair was slicked back and his teeth flashed in a bright, arrogant smile as he shook hands with a group of older, wealthy real estate developers. He looked incredibly proud and victorious. He honestly believed he had gotten away with his massive financial crimes. He believed he had successfully discarded his boring wife and secured his entry into the elite nine-figure club by marrying the daughter of a Vanguard executive. He had absolutely no idea that the federal authorities were waiting just outside the building. Chloe stood closely by his side, soaking in the attention of the crowd. She was squeezed into a tight, sparkling gold sequin dress that left very little to the imagination. Her neck and wrists were heavily adorned with expensive diamond jewelry that was undoubtedly purchased with more stolen escrow funds. She was clinging tightly to Bradley's arm and laughing loudly at a joke someone had just told. She tossed her head back and took a long celebratory sip from her crystal champagne flute. She looked exactly like a woman who believed she had just won the ultimate prize. Standing just a few feet away from the happy couple was Sarah. Bradley's snobbish sister looked equally triumphant in a sleek black designer evening gown. She was chatting animatedly with another group of corporate brokers, holding her own glass of champagne. They were all celebrating their successful criminal conspiracy right in front of the entire world. They were basking in the warm, glowing light of their completely stolen status. I did not hide in the shadows near the lobby. I did not shrink back or hesitate for a single second. I took a slow, deliberate step forward and walked directly into the center of the grand ballroom. My emerald silk gown caught the bright light of the chandeliers and seemed to shimmer with every confident step I took. My silver stiletto heels clicked sharply and rhythmically against the polished marble floor. As I moved deeper into the crowded room, a strange and powerful ripple effect began to take place. The wealthy guests who were standing near the entrance turned their heads to look at me. Their lively conversations instantly paused. The sheer confidence and absolute power radiating from my posture demanded their immediate attention. I kept my head held high and my icy gaze locked straight ahead toward the center of the room. The confused whispers started almost immediately. People nudged their partners and pointed discreetly in my direction. The low murmur of curious voices grew louder and began to spread across the massive ballroom like a fast-moving wildfire. Even the live jazz band, playing on the corner stage, seemed to sense the sudden drastic shift in the atmosphere. The music faltered slightly as the saxophone player lowered his shiny instrument to watch me pass. The dense sea of expensive dark suits and colorful designer dresses instinctively parted to make a clear and wide path for me. I was walking straight toward the center of the ballroom where my treacherous husband and his mistresses were standing. The sudden dramatic drop in the ambient noise of the room finally caught Chloe's attention. She lowered her crystal champagne glass and turned her head to see what the entire crowd of elite guests was staring at. The arrogant, victorious smile instantly vanished from her perfectly contoured face. Her jaw dropped open and her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated shock. She recognized me immediately, but she could not mentally comprehend what she was actually seeing. She was expecting the mousy, defeated woman she had mocked in my kitchen. She was expecting a broken housewife in a cheap thrift store cardigan. She was definitely not expecting a breathtaking woman who looked like she possessed the power to buy and sell the entire country club. Sarah noticed the heavy silence a fraction of a second later. She spun around, and her jaw tightened into a furious, ugly snarl the very moment she saw me gracefully approaching the center of the room. Sarah reached out and grabbed Chloe aggressively by the arm, pulling her away from Bradley. The two women marched frantically through the parting crowd of guests to intercept me before I could reach my husband. They blocked my path in the wide open space situated just between the grand lobby and the main marble dance floor. Hundreds of curious eyes were now permanently glued to our sudden confrontation. The silence in the ballroom was thick, heavy, and absolutely suffocating. "What the hell are you doing here, you crazy bitch?" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs. Her high-pitched voice echoed painfully loudly in the quiet room, completely shattering the elegant atmosphere of the gala. Her face was flushed dark red with extreme anger and deep social embarrassment. "Bradley explicitly told you to stay in that cheap house and never show your face around us ever again. You are absolutely pathetic. You just cannot accept the fact that he dumped you for someone better with real money." I stood perfectly still and looked down at her flushed, angry face. I did not raise my voice in response. I did not show a single ounce of fear or emotion. I just stared at her with an icy, unblinking gaze that made her physically take a nervous step backward. I let the heavy silence stretch out, allowing the entire room of wealthy guests to hear her crude and unhinged screaming. Sarah quickly stepped forward to shield Chloe from my intense gaze. Her eyes were blazing with furious indignation and a desperate need to maintain control of the situation. "You have some serious nerve showing up here tonight." "Abigail," Sarah hissed viciously, keeping her voice slightly lower but dripping with pure venom. "You think putting on a nice rented dress changes who you really are in the real world. You're nothing but a poor, desperate gold digger trying to ruin my brother's special night. You are embarrassing yourself in front of all these incredibly important people. Leave this building right now before I have you physically thrown out into the cold street like the garbage you are." I remained completely silent and unbothered by her harsh insults. My absolute calmness only enraged the two women further. Chloe was trembling with uncontrolled fury. Her chest heaved rapidly as she looked around at the wealthy investors and corporate elites who were watching her publicly lose her mind. In a sudden impulsive fit of blind rage, she raised her crystal glass and hurled her expensive vintage champagne directly at my feet. The pale, bubbly liquid splashed violently across the polished marble floor. The heavy crystal glass shattered into a dozen sharp, dangerous pieces, just inches away from the delicate hem of my emerald silk gown. A loud collective gasp rippled through the large crowd of stunned spectators. Several wealthy guests took a quick step backward to avoid being hit by the flying shards of broken glass. "Look at you!" Chloe yelled, pointing a violently shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "You are a crazy stalker. You are a sad, obsessed ex-wife who simply cannot take a hint and move on. Bradley is mine now. This beautiful, extravagant life is mine. You do not belong in a place like this, and you never, ever will." Sarah did not wait for me to formulate a response to the chaotic outburst. She turned around and frantically signaled to the country club security team standing at attention near the main entrance doors. "Security?" She barked loudly, waving her arms in the air. "Get over here immediately! This woman is trespassing on a private event. She is aggressively harassing our VIP guests and causing a violent physical disturbance. I want her removed from the property right now. Drag her out of here by her hair if you have to just get her out of my sight." 3 large, imposing security guards, dressed in dark professional suits, hurried through the whispering crowd toward our location. They looked incredibly tense and highly uncomfortable under the intense scrutiny of the wealthy and powerful guests. The lead security guard stepped forward with a serious expression and reached out his large hand toward my arm. "Ma, you need to come with us right now," the guard said, strictly attempting to assert his authority over the situation. "We do not want any trouble tonight, but you have to leave the premises immediately before we are forced to get physical." I did not flinch away from his approaching hand. I did not take a single step backward in retreat. I slowly turned my head and locked my eyes directly with the lead security guard. The ambient temperature in the grand ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees in a single second. I stood my ground, holding myself with perfect posture. I spoke in a voice that was perfectly calm, perfectly clear, and laced with an absolute terrifying authority that echoed clearly across the silent marble floor. "Do not touch me," I commanded quietly but firmly. The large security guard froze instantly in his tracks. His outstretched hand stopped just inches away from the silk fabric of my sleeve. He could sense the immense, undeniable weight of my authority. I looked directly into his unsure eyes and smiled a cold, lethal smile. "I am going to give you exactly 30 seconds to make a choice," I told the guard, keeping my voice steady and completely unbothered by the chaos around me. "You can try to put your hands on me and forcibly remove me from this building. But if you do that, I promise you that you will not only lose your job tonight, but you will face federal obstruction charges by Monday morning. I suggest you step back and wait exactly 30 seconds before you make a reckless decision that will ruin your entire life." The guard swallowed hard and slowly lowered his hand to his side. He looked nervously at Sarah, who was screaming at him to do his job, and then he looked back at me, clearly terrified by the sheer, absolute certainty in my voice. The entire ballroom held its breath, waiting in complete silence to see what would happen next. I turned my icy, triumphant gaze back to Chloe and Sarah, who were now staring at me in bewildered, frantic panic. The 30 seconds were ticking down, and the glorious execution of their criminal empire was finally about to begin. The silence in the grand ballroom was so incredibly dense that I could actually hear the rapid, shallow breathing of the security guard standing right in front of me. His large, heavy hand was still suspended in the cold air, frozen completely by the sheer, undeniable authority vibrating in my voice. He looked desperately at Sarah, who was practically vibrating with vicious anger, but he did not dare to close the final few inches between his broad fingers and my emerald silk gown. The wealthy high society guests surrounding us were completely captivated by the dramatic standoff, holding their collective breath as they waited to see what would happen next. Chloe let out a sharp, frustrated noise and stamped her sparkly high heel against the polished marble floor. She was so incredibly accustomed to getting exactly what she wanted the very moment she demanded it that my absolute refusal to back down was causing her to short-circuit. She honestly thought her family money and her elite status made her completely untouchable. She had absolutely no idea that she was currently balancing on the very edge of a massive bottomless cliff. The tension in the grand ballroom was so incredibly thick that you could practically feel it pressing heavily against your skin. Before the terrified security guard could make a reckless decision that would inevitably destroy his entire life and career, a new voice shattered the heavy silence. "What is the meaning of this massive disruption?" The booming, arrogant voice echoed across the expansive, opulent lobby. The dense crowd of wealthy socialites immediately parted to make way for a tall, older man with silver hair and a very flushed red face. It was Richard. He was Chloe's father and the regional vice president of Vanguard Holdings. He marched through the sea of expensive dark suits and colorful designer gowns, with his chest puffed out, entirely consumed by his own violently inflated sense of importance. He was wearing a custom-tailored black tuxedo that was visibly straining around his midsection. He carried a fresh glass of expensive vintage champagne in one hand, and he wore a furious, self-righteous scowl on his face. He had clearly heard the loud commotion and decided it was his absolute paternal duty to protect his precious daughter and her new partner from this uninvited guest. He stopped right next to Bradley and threw a highly condescending and disgusted glare in my direction. He looked at my beautiful emerald silk gown and let out a loud dismissive snort as if my very presence was a severe personal insult to his elite social standing. I do not care who you are or what your pathetic history is with my future son-in-law. Richard barked loudly, making sure his aggressive voice carried all the way to the back of the silent room. You are actively trespassing at a highly exclusive and private event. This spectacular evening is a celebration of my beautiful daughter and her brilliant new partner. We do not have the time or the patience to deal with jealous, hysterical ex-wives who simply cannot accept reality and move on with their sad lives. He turned his attention to the paralyzed security guards and shook his head with profound aggressive disgust. What exactly are you idiots waiting for? He demanded angrily. I am a major founding member of this prestigious country club. I pay thousands of dollars a month in exclusive dues, so my family does not have to deal with absolute garbage like this. I want this crazy woman physically removed from the property right now. Drag her out the back door and call the local police department. If she tries to fight back, I will personally ensure that she's locked up in a concrete cell for assault and trespassing. Richard turned back to Bradley and patted him firmly on the shoulder, offering him a sickeningly sweet smile of reassurance. Do not worry about a single thing, my boy, Richard said loudly. I will handle this pathetic little mess. I looked directly into Richard's furious red face, and I felt a deep, profound sense of genuine pity for the man. He was standing there, loudly bragging about his expensive country club membership and his fancy corporate title, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire career and legacy were about to evaporate into thin air. He honestly thought he was the absolute most powerful man in the entire building. He thought he held the heavy golden keys to the kingdom. I did not say a single word in response to his vicious threats. I simply shifted my icy gaze past his shoulder and looked directly at the massive glass double doors of the main country club entrance. Exactly on cue, the heavy brass handles turned downward. The massive door swung open with a tremendous physical force, letting a violent gust of cold, rainy wind sweep directly into the warm, opulent lobby. The sheer physical power of the entrance made several wealthy guests visibly jump backward in surprise. The low ambient hum of the country club completely vanished. The live jazz band, playing in the corner of the room, immediately stopped playing their shiny brass instruments. The sudden absolute silence that fell over the grand ballroom was entirely deafening. Every single pair of eyes in the entire building turned simultaneously toward the front entrance to see what had just happened. Stepping through the grand doorway was my father, Harrison. He did not simply walk into the room. He completely dominated it. He strode across the wide threshold with the terrifying absolute authority of a billionaire titan. He was wearing a flawless bespoke charcoal suit that radiated immense generational wealth and uncompromising power. His thick silver hair was perfectly styled, and his sharp ice blue eyes scanned the crowded room with the cold, predatory focus of a hunting apex predator. He was not alone. Flanking him on either side was his entire executive board of directors. A dozen incredibly powerful men and women dressed in severe, dark, tailored suits. Behind the executive board was a massive team of private corporate security. They were large, terrifying men with communication earpieces and cold, unblinking stares, who immediately fanned out across the grand lobby, completely securing the perimeter of the room in a matter of seconds. The sheer overwhelming presence of the Vanguard corporate empire crashing into the local suburban country club was a breathtaking and terrifying sight. The wealthy real estate developers and local socialites in the ballroom immediately shrank back in pure primal fear. They were people who desperately pretended to have money, but they instantly recognized what true limitless global wealth actually looked like. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, frantically backing away to create a wide, perfectly clear path for my father and his terrifying entourage. They knocked over tall crystal champagne glasses and stumbled over their own expensive designer shoes in their desperate, frantic rush to get out of his way. No one dared to breathe loudly. No one dared to speak a single word. They just stared in absolute stunned silence as the chairman of Vanguard Holdings walked slowly and deliberately across the polished marble floor. His heavy leather shoes echoed rhythmically against the stone, like the pounding drumbeat of an advancing conquering army. He was walking directly toward the center of the room, where Bradley, Chloe, Sarah, and Richard were standing entirely frozen in absolute shock. I kept my posture flawlessly straight and waited for the glorious impact of the collision. I watched Richard face very closely. The pompous, arrogant flush of bright red color drained completely out of his cheeks in a fraction of a second, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. His jaw literally dropped open in pure, unadulterated terror. He recognized his supreme boss immediately. He knew exactly who Harrison was, and he knew that the chairman of the global corporate board never ever made unannounced appearances at cheap suburban engagement parties. The heavy crystal champagne flute slipped right out of Richard's trembling hand and crashed onto the floor. He frantically pushed past Bradley and stumbled forward, almost tripping over his own clumsy feet in a desperate, pathetic attempt to welcome the billionaire tight into the room. He bent his back forward, bowing and groveling like a terrified peasant servant, completely abandoning his arrogant alpha male persona in front of the entire crowd. Mr. Chairman Richard stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak of sheer absolute panic. "What an absolute unexpected honor, sir. I had absolutely no idea you were coming to Chicago tonight. If you had informed my office, I would have arranged a proper grand corporate reception for you. Please, sir, welcome to my beautiful daughter engagement gala. We are so incredibly honored to have you here tonight." Richard practically begged, rubbing his sweaty hands together as he desperately tried to catch my father's eye. He honestly believed my father was there to celebrate the new alliance between his daughter and Bradley. He offered a sickly, nervous smile and gestured widely toward Bradley and Chloe, who were standing completely paralyzed with confusion and fear. "Please, sir, let me introduce you to my brilliant future son-in-law, Bradley. He's the amazing young man who recently secured the $50 million commercial lease agreement with our regional subsidiary." My father did not stop walking toward me at all. He did not even look in Richard's direction. He treated the regional vice president of his massive corporate subsidiary as if he were an invisible piece of rotten trash on the floor. He walked straight past the trembling, sweating man, completely ignoring his frantic groveling and his desperate, pathetic attempts at conversation. The brutal, icy dismissal was a fatal, catastrophic blow to Richard's fragile ego. He stood there with his arm awkwardly outstretched, his mouth hanging open in pure, stunned humiliation. My father continued his march across the marble floor, closing the final distance between us. He stopped directly in front of me. The terrifying, predatory glare in his ice-blue eyes instantly softened into a look of profound, unconditional love and immense burning pride. He reached out with his large, warm hands and gently held my shoulders. He leaned forward and pressed a soft, lingering kiss against my cheek, right in front of the silent, staring crowd. "Are these the terrible people bothering you here today, Abigail?" my father asked. His deep, powerful voice boomed across the silent, stunned lobby, echoing off the crystal chandeliers and the tall glass windows. He did not use a microphone, but his words carried absolute lethal clarity to every single corner of the massive room. The sheer impact of his casual, terrifying question hit the group like a catastrophic earthquake. I slowly turned my head and looked directly at Bradley. I watched the exact microscopic second that his entire universe completely and utterly imploded. The healthy, confident color vanished entirely from his arrogant face, leaving him looking like a sick, decaying corpse. The crystal champagne flute he was holding slipped right through his paralyzed, trembling fingers. It hit the hard marble floor with a sharp, violent crack, shattering into hundreds of tiny, glittering pieces at his feet. He stared at me, his bloodshot eyes darting frantically from my face to my father's face and back again, as the horrifying mathematical reality finally clicked into place in his brain. The realization hit him hard, like a massive runaway freight train. Chloe let out a tiny, broken gasp, sounding exactly like a weak, dying animal caught in a metal trap. She looked at me as if she had just seen a terrifying and incredibly dangerous monster rising from the deep. The quiet, boring thrift store housewife that Bradley had so casually and cruelly thrown away like yesterday garbage was the soul-blood heiress to the very global corporate empire he had so desperately and foolishly tried to steal from. I stepped smoothly past my father, leaving the protective circle of the Vanguard Executive Board. The marble floor of the grand ballroom seemed to stretch out before me like a long runway. The absolute silence in the room was deafening. You could hear the faint rustle of my emerald green silk gown as it brushed against the floorboards. You could hear the shallow, terrified breathing of the high society guests who had just witnessed the total collapse of Richard and his corporate career. I did not look back at my father. I did not spare a single glance for the security guards who were now backing away into the shadows, completely terrified of the power my family had brought into the room. My eyes were locked entirely on the raised wooden stage at the far end of the ballroom where the live jazz band had been playing just moments before. I walked with a slow, deliberate, and lethal grace. Bradley was standing to my left, staring at me with hollow, bloodshot eyes, as if he were looking at an actual ghost. Chloe was frozen right beside him, her mouth opening and closing silently, like a suffocating fish. I glided right past them without a single word. I climbed the 3 carpeted steps to the main stage and walked directly over to the standing silver microphone. I adjusted the height of the microphone stand with a calm, steady hand. I looked out over the massive crowd of wealthy real estate developers, corporate investors, and local socialites. These were the very people Bradley had invited to witness his triumphant ascension into the elite billionaire club. They were staring back at me with expressions of pure bewilderment and rising panic. They knew who my father was, and they knew that my presence on this stage meant their investments were suddenly in extreme jeopardy. I did not yell. I did not shed a single tear. The naive, heartbroken wife who had cried on the stairs of her suburban home was entirely dead. I took a deep, cleansing breath. My pulse was a slow, steady drumbeat of absolute control. I turned my gaze slightly toward the back of the room and found the audiovisual control booth. A young technician wearing a black headset was sitting behind a massive soundboard. My father's private security team had already paid him a visit and a very generous sum of cash an hour before the gala began. I gave the technician a single sharp nod. Instantly, the massive white projector screens positioned on the walls behind the stage flashed to life. A blinding white light filled the dimly lit ballroom. The enormous displays usually reserved for romantic slideshows of the happy couple were now projecting the very foundation of my vengeance. The first document appeared on the screens in massive high-definition resolution. It was the secondary mortgage agreement for my marital home. I leaned into the microphone. My voice echoed through the massive ballroom, carrying a deadly cold and unbothered tone. It was a voice dripping with pure boss energy. "Good evening, everyone." I began my words, slicing through the heavy tension in the room. "My name is Abigail. You all know me as Bradley, quiet, boring, and entirely unremarkable wife. Bradley invited you here tonight to celebrate his incredible wealth and his brilliant new corporate alliances. But I thought it would be far more appropriate to show you exactly how he funded this lavish party." I raised my hand and pointed to the massive screens behind me. "Please, take a very close look at the document currently displayed for your viewing pleasure. That is a secondary mortgage application taken out against my personal property. It authorized the extraction of hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid cash. If you look closely at the bottom right corner, you will see my signature. The only problem is, I never signed that document. Bradley forged my name in a desperate attempt to steal the equity I built with my own money. He committed federal bank fraud to keep his failing business afloat." A collective, horrified gasp rolled through the crowd. Men in expensive dark suits adjusted their ties nervously. Women in designer gowns covered their mouths in genuine shock. But I was not even close to being finished. I gave another slight nod to the control booth. The screen transitioned from the forged mortgage to a sprawling, complex digital spreadsheet. It was the master escrow ledger for Bradley Commercial Real Estate Firm. The numbers were highlighted in bright, aggressive red ink. I looked down at the crowd, targeting the specific faces of the wealthy investors Bradley had been courting. "What you are looking at now are the protected client escrow accounts managed by Bradley Firm," I announced, letting my voice ring out with crystal clear articulation. "These are the funds you explicitly trusted him to hold safely for your commercial building leases. As you can clearly see by the highlighted negative balances, those funds no longer exist. Bradley has been systematically siphoning millions of dollars from your private escrow accounts. He transferred your hard-earned money through a series of illegal dummy corporations registered in Delaware. He washed the money completely clean using fraudulent vendor invoices and deposited the cash directly into his own private offshore banking accounts. He is not a titan of industry. He is a common thief running a massive illegal shell game with your money. The reaction in the ballroom was absolutely instantaneous and completely catastrophic. Complete chaos erupted among the high society guests. Wealthy investors began shouting in panic. Dozens of men in the front row immediately pulled their expensive smartphones from their jacket pockets, frantically dialing their private bankers and wealth managers, demanding emergency account freezes. The room descended into a state of absolute terror as the people who had blindly trusted Bradley realized their millions of dollars were completely gone. I watched them scramble and panic, feeling a cold, satisfying thrill wash over every single nerve in my body. This was the exact financial slaughter I had meticulously orchestrated. I looked down at Bradley. He was physically trembling so violently that he looked like he was having a medical emergency. He was sweating profusely through his expensive custom-tailored tuxedo. Large, dark, wet patches stained the fabric under his arms. He was staring up at the massive projector screens, watching the undeniable digital proof of his federal crimes broadcast to his entire social and professional circle. He had nowhere to hide. He had absolutely no excuses left. He was publicly confessing to millions in fraud without uttering a single word. Suddenly, a high-pitched, hysterical scream pierced through the panicked shouting of the investors. It was Chloe. She pushed her way to the very front of the crowd, stepping right up to the edge of the stage. Her face was contorted into an ugly, twisted mask of sheer denial and bubbling rage. "That is a lie," she shrieked, pointing her shaking finger up at me. "You are making all of this up because you are a jealous, pathetic loser. Bradley is a millionaire. He did not steal anything. You are just trying to ruin my perfect night." I looked down at the spoiled, entitled girl in her sparkling gold dress. I did not flinch at her aggressive outburst. I simply gave a third nod to the audiovisual technician hidden in the back booth. The massive screens behind me shifted instantly. The new documents displayed were crystal clear wire transfer receipts. The routing numbers were blown up to massive proportions for the entire room to see. I leaned back into the microphone. "Is it a lie, Chloe?" I asked, my voice remaining perfectly calm and steady, because the documents currently displayed on the screens behind me tell a very different story. These are the exact wire transfers linking the stolen client escrow funds directly to the purchase of your brand new luxury European sports car. And right next to that is the digital transfer receipt for your new penthouse condo in the financial district. Bradley did not buy those gifts with his own money. He bought your entire fake lifestyle using the stolen cash of the investors standing right next to you. The crowd of wealthy developers physically turned on Chloe. The men and women who had just been smiling and chatting with her suddenly looked at her with pure violent disgust. They realized that the expensive diamond jewelry sparkling on her neck and the designer dress she was wearing were literally purchased with their stolen money. Chloe took a stumbling, terrified step backward. The arrogant, victorious energy completely evaporated from her body. She looked around at the hostile, angry faces closing in on her and finally realized that her wealthy father could no longer protect her. Richard was still standing near the lobby doors, completely paralyzed by his own impending corporate destruction. He could not save her from the undeniable mathematical reality displayed on the screens. Chloe wrapped her arms around her stomach, looking like a frightened child who had just been caught stealing from a candy store. The brutal reality of the numbers was absolutely irrefutable. She had bragged about her luxurious new life, and now the entire world knew she was nothing but a pawn funded by federal wire fraud. But the absolute best part of my counterattack was still waiting to be delivered. I looked past the trembling Chloe and found Sarah trying desperately to quietly slip away toward the side exit doors. Bradley's snobbish sister was hoping to escape the blast radius of her brother's destruction. I was not going to let her leave this building with her real estate license intact. I spoke into the microphone once more, my voice ringing with absolute chilling authority. You might be wondering how Bradley managed to bypass the strict federal banking regulations to purchase that luxury penthouse condo, I said, commanding the attention of the frantic crowd. He certainly could not have done it alone. He needed the help of a licensed commercial real estate broker, someone who knew exactly how to falsify income statements and push fraudulent paperwork past the bank regulators. I signaled the technician one final time. The screens went entirely black, but the massive surround sound speakers mounted on the walls of the ballroom crackled to life. I stood perfectly still on the stage as the crystal-clear audio recording began to play. It was the exact conversation from my living room staircase just a few days prior. The sound of Sarah's incredibly arrogant, condescending voice filled the entire country club. That is exactly why Bradley needs me. Her recorded voice boasted echoing of the high ceilings. I set up a dummy corporation in Delaware under Chloe name. I routed the stolen escrow funds through 3 different holding accounts to wash the money clean. Then I personally filed the mortgage application and the deed of trust. I used my broker credentials to completely bypass the standard know your customer regulations. I falsified Chloe income statements to make it look like she was a high net worth investor, and I approved the sale myself. The bank never even looked twice because I put my professional seal on the paperwork. The entire ballroom went completely and utterly silent again. The wealthy investors stopped yelling into their phones and turned their furious stares directly toward the side exit doors. Sarah froze in her tracks. She looked exactly like a deer caught in the blinding headlights of a speeding truck. Her face turned chalk white. The sheer breathtaking audacity of her recorded confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud of poison. She had just admitted to federal bank fraud, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy in front of a room full of powerful people. Her entire real estate career was instantly and permanently vaporized. No client would ever trust her again. The state licensing board would revoke her credentials by Monday morning, and the federal investigators would use her own bragging words to lock her inside a prison cell for a very long time. Sarah slowly raised her hands to cover her face, completely destroyed by her own massive uncontainable ego. I watched her crumble and felt a profound sense of pure, unadulterated justice. I turned my gaze slowly back to Bradley. He was no longer standing up straight. His knees had literally buckled under the immense crushing pressure of the situation. He was kneeling on the polished marble floor directly on top of the shattered pieces of his dropped champagne flute. He did not even seem to notice the sharp glass cutting into the expensive fabric of his tailored trousers. He was staring up at me with a look of absolute total devastation. He had spent 6 years treating me like an uneducated, insignificant burden. He had forged my signature, plotted to leave me entirely bankrupt, and brought his arrogant mistress into my home to mock my modest clothing. He firmly believed I was a gullible fool who would simply cry and accept a miserable $10,000 settlement. He never bothered to actually look at the woman he married. If he had, he would have realized he was sleeping next to a highly trained senior forensic auditor with the full backing of a billionaire empire. I looked down at the broken, trembling man who had completely destroyed our marriage. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I did not feel any lingering sorrow. I simply reached forward and adjusted the silver microphone one last time. "Bradley," I said, my voice dropping into a quiet, deadly register that echoed clearly across the silent ballroom. "You told me that winners do whatever it takes to secure their legacy. You told me that you needed a partner who could command absolute respect in a room full of elite investors." I looked out over the shocked, horrified faces of the crowd and then back down at my husband. I think I have captured their attention perfectly tonight. I stepped away from the microphone, leaving the undeniable proof of his federal crimes burning brightly on the massive projector screens behind me. The financial slaughter was entirely complete. His company was bankrupt. His reputation was reduced to ashes. His future was a concrete prison cell. I turned around and began to walk off the stage, radiating the absolute supreme energy of a woman who had just burned a corrupt empire straight to the ground. The silence in the grand ballroom was broken by the frantic murmurs of the wealthy elite. The absolute destruction of Bradley was playing out on the massive screens above us. I stood on the stage and watched the sheer terror consume the room. Richard was completely paralyzed by the horrifying reality of the situation. He stared at the digital evidence projecting his daughter as a common criminal. The red color flushed back into his face. He frantically pushed his way through the stunned crowd of investors. He was sweating heavily and gasping for air to simply save his own life. Richard stepped over the shattered glass of the dropped champagne flute and approached the stage. He pointed a trembling finger at Bradley and his own daughter. He puffed out his chest and tried to loudly distance himself from their unbelievable crimes. He yelled that he had absolutely no idea about the stolen escrow accounts. He told the horrified crowd that his daughter was a foolish girl who had been manipulated by a pathetic con artist. He completely disowned her right there on the polished marble floor. Chloe began to sob hysterically as her own father threw her under the bus. He loudly demanded that the country club security guard step forward and throw Bradley out of the engagement gala. He desperately wanted to protect his precious corporate reputation. He thought that loudly condemning the couple would save his career at Vanguard Holdings. He turned around and tried to look incredibly innocent in front of the wealthy investors, but his arrogant words were suddenly cut entirely short. The massive wooden doors of the ballroom swung wide open for the final time tonight. The cold rain from outside blew into the warm room. The atmosphere in the building instantly shifted once again. My father, Harrison, strode confidently through the grand lobby and entered the extravagant ballroom. He was flanked tightly by his senior executive board and a massive team of personal corporate security guards. He radiated pure unlimited wealth and terrifying absolute authority. He wore an immaculate tailored charcoal suit that commanded immediate total respect from every single person in the room. The local high society guests instinctively backed away to give him space. Richard stopped screaming and stared at the advancing billionaire titan. The arrogant mask on his face instantly melted away into an expression of pure, unadulterated, absolute terror now. Richard realized his supreme corporate leader was witnessing this massive, disastrous scene. He rushed forward awkwardly, bowing and groveling to the chairman of his parent company. He wiped the heavy sweat from his shiny forehead and tried to offer a pathetic, welcoming smile. Mr. Chairman Richard stammered loudly, trying to project fake confidence to the silent room. "What an incredible, unexpected honor it is to have you attend this beautiful celebration tonight. I can explain this minor disruption very quickly, sir." My father did not stop walking. He completely ignored the trembling vice president and moved straight past him entirely. My father stopped directly in front of the raised wooden stage. He looked up at me with profound, unconditional love and immense burning pride. He reached out and gently kissed my cheek right in front of the completely stunned high society crowd. "Are these the terrible people bothering you today, Abigail?" my father asked. His deep, powerful voice boomed across the silent lobby and echoed violently off the expensive crystal chandeliers. The sheer impact of his casual question hit the group like a catastrophic earthquake. The devastating realization suddenly clicked into place inside the brain of my cheating husband today. Bradley stared at me as the horrifying truth hit him like a massive runaway freight train. The quiet, boring woman he had cruelly thrown away was actually the sole blood heiress to the very global corporate empire he was desperately trying to steal from. His breathing became incredibly shallow and erratic. He trembled so violently that he completely lost his grip on his heavy crystal champagne flute. The expensive glass slipped right through his sweaty, paralyzed fingers. It hit the hard, polished marble floor with a sharp, violent crack and shattered into hundreds of tiny, glittering pieces completely and instantly. Chloe stumbled backward and covered her mouth in absolute sheer terror. She looked like she had just seen a dangerous, terrifying ghost rising from the floor. Richard watched the shattered glass scatter across his expensive leather shoes. He finally understood that he had just publicly cursed out the beloved daughter of his supreme boss. My father turned his cold, predatory focus directly onto the trembling vice president. "Richard, you are an absolute disgrace to Vanguard Holdings," my father stated with a deep, lethal calmness. "Your pathetic attempt to use my corporate subsidiary to secure this criminal marriage ends right today." My father reached into the inside pocket of his bespoke charcoal suit jacket. He pulled out a crisp white envelope bearing the heavy red corporate seal. He dropped the envelope directly onto the marble floor at his trembling feet. "That is your official immediate termination letter," my father announced coldly. "You are fired for gross incompetence and criminal complicity. We are permanently stripping you of your corporate titles, your unvested stock options, and your entire professional reputation. Your family wealth and status are officially revoked. You are absolutely nothing to me anymore." The wealthy guests gasped loudly in pure shock. Richard collapsed entirely to his knees on the hard stone floor. He buried his sweaty red face in his shaking hands and began to weep pathetically. His entire social empire had evaporated in mere seconds. Chloe shrieked in absolute terror as she watched her arrogant father lose all his power. She knew that her golden ticket to endless luxury shopping trips was completely gone. But the financial slaughter was only the opening act of my beautiful revenge. Right on cue, the massive heavy double doors of the grand ballroom swung wide open for the final time tonight. Perfect timing arrived. A tactical team of federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division swarmed into the extravagant ballroom. They moved with swift, terrifying precision. Their dark windbreakers clearly displayed bright yellow block letters across the back. The high society crowd practically trampled each other, trying to get out of the way. The agents had been tipped off by my incredibly thorough forensic audit. They had reviewed the digital escrow ledgers and the audio recordings. The federal strike team marched directly past the sobbing Richard and rapidly surrounded the absolute center of the room. Bradley backed away, trembling violently in pure fear today. The lead agent stepped firmly toward my cheating husband and aggressively grabbed his expensive tuxedo jacket. "Bradley, you are under federal arrest for massive wire fraud, bank fraud, and the illegal embezzlement of millions in commercial client escrow funds." The agent barked loudly, the harsh metallic sound of cold steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around his wrists echoed sharply across the silent room. Bradley let out a horrible, pathetic wail as the heavy steel locked into place. His knees buckled completely, and the agents had to physically hold him upright. His entire life was officially destroyed right in front of me. Sarah watched her arrogant brother get chained up like a common criminal. Panic completely overtook her brain. She knew she was next. She dropped her crystal champagne glass and spun around desperately, trying to sprint toward the side exit doors. She did not even make it 5 feet. A tall female federal agent expertly tackled her from behind, pinning the struggling, snobbish real estate broker directly against the cold marble floor. Sarah shrieked hysterically, thrashing her arms and kicking her expensive stiletto heels as the female agent forcefully pinned her wrists behind her back and slapped the steel cuffs shut. "You cannot do this to me!" Sarah wailed loudly, pressing her perfectly contoured face against the dusty stone tiles. "I am a licensed broker." The female agent yanked her up aggressively. "You are an indicted felon now," the agent replied coldly. Bradley was hyperventilating as the officers began dragging him backward through the crowd toward the main lobby doors. He looked completely unhinged. Tears streamed rapidly down his pale, sweating cheeks, ruining his perfect, arrogant facade. He locked his desperate, bloodshot eyes on me as I stood proudly on the wooden stage, radiating pure absolute authority and boss energy today. "Abigail, please!" Bradley screamed hysterically, fighting fruitlessly against the strong grip of the federal agents. His voice cracked into a high-pitched shriek of absolute desperation. "I am so sorry. I made a terrible mistake. I still love you. Please tell your father to stop this. Tell them to let me go. I will do anything you want, Abigail. I will be a perfect husband. Just please, save me." The entire room watched the disgraced former millionaire beg and grovel pathetically at my silver stiletto heels. I looked down at him, keeping my facial expression entirely blank and perfectly hollow. "I do not recycle trash." "Bradley," I stated coldly, my voice carrying clearly through the silent, massive ballroom. "Enjoy federal prison." The agents aggressively yanked him backward through the heavy glass double doors. His pathetic, broken wails faded slowly into the rainy, dark night outside. The flashing red and blue lights from the federal vehicles illuminated the lobby windows, painting the final scene of his utter destruction. Sarah was dragged out completely, kicking and screaming right behind him. The absolute silence in the country club returned heavier and much more profound than ever before in my entire life right now. Chloe was left entirely alone, kneeling on the cold marble floor in her tight, sparkling gold designer gown. The arrogant smirk she had worn all evening was completely erased. She began to sob hysterically, clutching her stomach in pure agony. The horrible, devastating reality was finally sinking deeply into her brain. Her rich, successful fiancé was going to prison for decades. Her wealthy, powerful father was publicly fired, stripped of his corporate titles, and permanently disgraced. The expensive luxury condo she bragged about, the fast European sports car, and her entire future were about to be seized by the government. She had tried to steal my life, and instead, she had effectively destroyed her own. I watched her weep pathetically on the floor, and I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, only the cool, refreshing clarity of absolute supreme justice. My father walked over and placed his warm, strong hand on my shoulder. We had won. The corrupt empire was completely dismantled, and the guilty traitors were locked in steel chains. I turned my back on the sobbing mistress and the ruined vice president. I took the arm of my father, and we walked slowly toward the lobby doors. Karma never misses an address. The greedy manipulators and the cruel betrayers will always suffer the most tragic endings brought about by their own desperate hands. Meanwhile, the kind-hearted will patiently weather the devastating storms and ultimately receive the glorious justice they truly deserve. I walked out into the cool evening breeze, feeling completely reborn and entirely invincible. The dark nightmare of my toxic marriage was permanently over. A bright new chapter of my life had officially begun, and I held the absolute power to write every single beautiful page exactly how I wanted it to be starting now. The wealthy crowd immediately parted to let us pass. They bowed in deep respect as the true heirs made our grand exit. My massive fortune was completely safe. My marital assets were fully secured, and the home I purchased was restored safely. Women can sacrifice, but we should never be foolish. When backed into a corner, show them your true strength. If you feel satisfied with this ending, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel. What time is it where you are watching this video, and where are you from? Let me know in the comments below. 6 months have completely passed since that spectacular rainy Saturday night at the Oak Brook Country Club. The heavy, thick dust from the massive explosion of my revenge has finally settled over the city of Chicago. The legal fallout was incredibly swift, brutal, and entirely uncompromising. The federal justice system moves with a terrifying and relentless precision when they are handed a flawlessly prepared portfolio of irrefutable forensic evidence. I sat in the very front row of the federal courtroom every single day of the highly publicized trial. The heavy wooden benches and the solemn atmosphere of the room provided the perfect backdrop for my ultimate victory. I watched with absolute hollow satisfaction as the slick, arrogant facade was completely stripped away from the man I once called my husband. Bradley was no longer the charming real estate titan who wore expensive custom-tailored suits and confidently sipped vintage champagne. He was rapidly reduced to a trembling and pathetic shell of a man wearing a bright orange prison jumpsuit that seemed to swallow his shrinking, terrified frame. His expensive defense attorneys tried desperately to argue that he was simply a victim of a turbulent financial market, but the digital money trail I had provided left absolutely no room for doubt. The prosecuting attorneys displayed the fake secondary mortgage documents and the illegal offshore wire transfers to the silent jury. The judge did not show him a single ounce of mercy or compassion. He looked down from his high wooden bench with pure disgust and sentenced Bradley to 12 consecutive years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The charges included massive wire fraud, criminal embezzlement, and multiple severe counts of federal bank fraud. Bradley wept openly and loudly in the quiet courtroom when the heavy sentence was finally read aloud. He turned his head and desperately searched the crowded gallery for my face, begging silently for a magical lifeline that simply did not exist. I looked right back at him with an expression of pure, icy indifference. He had built a fragile house of cards on the deep foundation of my silent sacrifices, and now he was going exactly where he belonged. There would be no luxury sports cars in his future. There would be no exclusive country club memberships or expensive steak dinners. He was going to spend the next decade of his life locked inside a cold concrete cage, completely stripped of his freedom and his stolen dignity. The swift and brutal hand of karma did not stop with my treacherous husband. His incredibly snobbish and manipulative sister Sarah faced her own spectacular and devastating downfall. For years, she had paraded around the city, pretending to be a superior intellectual force simply because she held a commercial real estate license. She had looked down on me and treated me like an uneducated servant in my own home. But the crystal-clear audio recording of her arrogant confession played right into the eager hands of the federal prosecutors. The State Real Estate Licensing Board held an emergency disciplinary hearing just 3 days after the country club gala. They played her recorded voice, bragging about bypassing banking regulations and falsifying income statements over the loudspeakers for the entire board to hear. They permanently and irrevocably revoked her broker credentials on the spot. She was publicly barred from ever participating in any real estate transaction in the entire country for the rest of her natural life. Her prestigious firm fired her immediately, actively distancing themselves from the toxic radiation of her massive criminal conspiracy. But the deep professional humiliation was only the very beginning of her absolute legal nightmare. Sarah is currently facing multiple severe criminal charges for her active role in laundering the stolen commercial escrow funds. She spends her miserable days sitting in cheap plastic chairs in the waiting rooms of overworked public defenders, desperately trying to negotiate a plea deal to avoid joining her brother in federal prison. Her wealthy elite friends have completely abandoned her. Her high society social circle wants absolutely nothing to do with a disgraced and indicted felon. She is entirely alone, trapped in a miserable reality of her own greedy making. The profound collateral damage extended directly to the foolish vice president and his spoiled, entitled daughter. Richard had spent his entire adult career kissing up to corporate superiors and ruthlessly bullying his subordinates to claw his way into a corner office at Vanguard Holdings. He had risked absolutely everything to secure a wealthy husband for Chloe, completely blinding himself to the massive legal red flags surrounding Bradley. When my father publicly terminated his employment in front of the entire country club elite, the news spread through the financial district like a raging, uncontrollable wildfire. No reputable company would ever dream of hiring a man who had been personally fired and publicly disgraced by the chairman of Vanguard Holdings. Stripped of his massive unvested stock options and his exorbitant corporate salary, Richard found himself drowning in a deep, dark ocean of massive outstanding debt. He was forced to declare complete personal bankruptcy in front of a federal judge. His sprawling luxury estate in the wealthy suburbs was aggressively foreclosed upon by the nervous banks. His entire collection of expensive vintage cars was immediately repossessed by aggressive collection agencies. He lost absolutely everything he had spent his entire pathetic life trying to accumulate. His daughter Chloe suffered a remarkably similar and equally devastating fate. The government investigators moved with incredible speed to freeze all the financial assets connected to the stolen money. The brilliant luxury penthouse condo she had loudly bragged about was immediately seized by federal authorities. The expensive European sports car and the glittering diamond jewelry were completely confiscated to help repay the innocent commercial investors that Bradley had scammed. Chloe was unceremoniously evicted from the downtown financial district with absolutely nothing but a small cardboard box of cheap clothes. Her grand delusions of marrying a handsome millionaire and ruling the high society elite were completely and totally pulverized. I recently heard through the local corporate grapevine that she is currently working the grueling overnight shift at a cheap, greasy diner on the far dusty edge of town. The arrogant girl, who once stood in my beautiful kitchen and mocked my modest clothing, now spends her dark nights wearing a stained polyester uniform, wiping up spilled coffee and scrubbing dirty, sticky tables for minimum wage. She truly thought she was stealing a glamorous modern fairy tale, but she actually walked right into a permanent waking nightmare. The universe has a beautiful and terrifying way of permanently balancing the scales of justice. As for my own path, the entire recovery process was a quiet and incredibly empowering personal journey, because I was the individual who personally provided the flawless forensic evidence and the detailed financial roadmap that recovered the stolen funds. The federal courts treated me with the absolute utmost respect. The presiding judge legally separated my personal finances from the criminal enterprise Bradley had foolishly constructed. The courts awarded me full unilateral ownership of our original marital assets, including a massive financial damage settlement for the profound emotional and psychological distress caused by the fraudulent secondary mortgage. The substantial amount of liquid cash was returned safely to my secure private bank accounts. I possessed the unilateral legal authority to return to the sprawling suburban house that I had meticulously maintained for the past 6 years. But I chose not to go back to that place. That house was nothing but a hollow structure built on a deep foundation of lies and bitter, silent sacrifices. It was a suffocating emotional cage where I had deliberately dimmed my own bright light to make a mediocre cheating man feel like a powerful giant. I hired a premium real estate agency and sold the property fully furnished to the absolute highest bidder. I did not keep a single piece of furniture or a single useless memory from that toxic environment. I wanted a completely clean slate. The massive financial profits from the sale were quietly transferred into my growing personal investment portfolio. The terrified, helpless housewife who used to clip grocery coupons and wash dishes in the shadows was entirely erased from existence. I had successfully shed that false identity like an old, heavy, useless snakeskin. I packed up my new life and relocated directly to the vibrant, beating heart of Manhattan. I officially stepped into my rightful family legacy, taking my designated position as the Senior Vice President of Mergers and Acquisitions at the global headquarters of Vanguard Holdings. I traded my cheap thrift store sweaters for immaculate custom-tailored designer power suits. I traded my quiet, submissive silence for a commanding, authoritative voice that dictates the precise movement of billions of dollars across the international corporate market. I now spend my busy days working side by side with my father, Harrison. He looks at me with a profound, unshakable pride, knowing that the sleeping dragon inside me has finally awakened. We operate the massive corporate empire together as a completely indestructible and unified front. I am surrounded by immense generational wealth, absolute corporate loyalty, and brilliant financial minds who deeply respect my supreme analytical authority. I am currently standing perfectly still by the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of my expansive corner office. The spectacular, glittering skyline of New York City stretches out endlessly before me. The late afternoon sun is reflecting brilliantly off the towering steel skyscrapers, painting the bustling city streets in a warm, victorious golden light. I hold a warm cup of rich, dark espresso in my hand, feeling the steady, calming rhythm of my own independent heartbeat. I look down at the busy avenues far below, feeling an incredible sense of deep, lasting peace wash over my entire soul. I no longer seek empty validation from insecure men who are intimidated by my intelligence. I no longer fold myself into small, invisible corners to accommodate the fragile egos of treacherous cowards. I have finally found my true inner strength. I have found my powerful, unwavering voice and my absolute genuine worth. The painful emotional betrayal I endured was simply the necessary fire that burned away my naive illusions. It forged me into a weapon of pure, calculated justice. I learned the hard way that you cannot build a happy, secure home with someone who sees your endless loyalty as a weakness to be exploited. I learned that true, absolute power does not come from screaming or throwing tantrums in the middle of a crowded room like a spoiled child. True absolute power comes from meticulous planning, silent execution, and striking your enemies precisely when they firmly believe they have already won the war. Women can sacrifice for love, but we should never be foolish. We must always keep our minds incredibly sharp and our eyes wide open. We must never ignore the quiet red flags or allow anyone to systematically dismantle our self-respect. Because when pushed to the absolute brink, a woman's true strength is the most terrifying force on earth. If you feel satisfied with this ending, please give me a like and subscribe to the channel. What time is it where you are watching this video and where are you from? Let me know in the comments below.